Well, hello, hello, hello. We're live on YouTube here, but we're going to have to be a little bit careful. Now, I've said before a couple of times already that I'm not in the business of doing current affairs. I didn't think that I ever wanted to be a commentator, political pundit, or somebody who'd be bringing you news. And anyway, I'm not bringing you news. At most, it's a little bit of, I suppose, reporting very, very late on something that other people would have reported on. But maybe we're going to do something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't do because could be a bit dry. But I think we're going to find a way to read through this thing without necessarily reading it line for line and getting a sense for what it's about. Um, it's also, of course, about a subject which we're not really allowed to talk about. It crosses two things. It crosses the idea that there is such a thing as the emergent New World Order and a sort of a global governance, is perhaps how they would put it now. Oh, we're not the New World Order, we're just global governance, good global governance. And governance, as I learned over several years of interpreting what these people really meant, these types, when they used these terrible, fake sounding, insincere, saccharine euphemisms, was when they said governance. What it really meant was the unelected overlords, people you maybe don't really even get to see, ever meet, even know their names. And that's the way it works in the corporatocracy, in corporate America, in global corporations. And look, I think that most people, I felt like it was a radical statement to make recently enough. I mean, in the last maybe 3 years, I pretty much said I am absolutely definitively certain that all of our governments have been taken over by corporations bit by bit. There's such a thing as regulatory capture, so why not governmental capture? So certainly that has happened. And so really what's happening now is really just an updating of corporate policy to reflect the de facto situation. De facto being some kind of legalese Latin term meaning because that's what we do, it's come into the way that we operate. So we might as well just formalize it now by making it all nice and legal. So nobody can sort of say, hey, what you're doing is wrong and immoral, because then they can say, oh, not at all. Morality and correctitude is in accordance with international law and international best practices. We used to get that all the time as well. We're only doing this in accordance with international best practices. So it's always like, well, everybody else is doing it, so we have to do it. And we're just harmonizing. We just want to harmonize with you, Guy. And everybody else, that's all. We're just harmonizing. We're like, Paul McCartney, and he's ebony and ivory. And who was that guy? Why can't I think of his name? Sways from side to side, pretends that he's blind by wearing the shades. I'll let JC come in and he's going to tell me who that guy is. Because it's weird. When you just go live, sometimes you forget real simple stuff, But that's a lead into what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to look then at, I don't want to say their name because I've said a few little kind of things already, but we might say their name a little bit longer. But I won't say exactly who I'm talking about, right? Let's put it that way, right? It can be a little bit um, circumspect like that. So I'll introduce my friend JC now. He's going to be going through this document. It's a draft document, but it gives us the gist. Maybe they've got a more modern one, but gives us the gist anyway. And also instructive to note the date of this draft document. It's from the, I think, 11th of July of 2022. So these people have been working away in the background, even though we've been distracted by a lot of things. But of course, there's a lot of things that are actually happening in the real world as well. Anyway, I'll introduce my friend JC here. He is an ex-Freemason and member of the Order of the Knights Templar. Now he's a member of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. And he's going to remind me anyway, who's that guy who probably isn't blind at all? I like that conspiracy theory. That's just been his stock in trade, that maybe people wouldn't be that impressed by his singing and his piano playing if he wasn't blind, maybe Ray Charles did it better. So, JC, without further ado, please maybe give us your thoughts initially on this document and the people we're going to be talking about and what it might mean for not just America, but certainly every country in Christendom or the Western world, Christendom as it was, if not the entire world.
Oh, okay. Well, as usual, we're trying to tackle, a target that's pretty big, but we will do our best here. And the guy you were looking for, Stevie Wonder, I do believe is the one you're looking for. Used to do the Pepsi commercials, or no,
That's the
that
one.
was
So I think
Charles
Paul
Dickens,
McCartney, didn't he do a
or did
duet with Paul McCartney? Ebony and Ivory. And it was so good because the piano keys are just like that, and it's them. Of course, now if you pointed that out too much, like I can't really. You can't even talk about what certain colors are.
right?
Otherwise, that's it's a thought crime, basically. Even to think it. So anyway, sorry for interrupting, but that's exactly it. Stevie Wonder and Paul McCartney, I think, had that song "Ebony and Ivory," because then if we think about it, we can all just merge together and get along in a one world corporate good governance takeover.
Yes, pretty much. And I mean, you're going to find that with most of those, most of the actors and performers of that time period, they got together and did that whole "We Are the World," and all that kind of mess. They all sang that
We
song together.
are the children.
Yeah, like,
I thought we were going to do a duet there, right there. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's
yeah.
stop giving. Yeah.
For me, it's just a matter of like, oh yeah, like that's just a cover for human trafficking more than likely. So to me, it's ominous as all hell. But
But it's a choice we're making. We care about the world. We love
sure.
children as well. Oh, yeah. We really love the kids.
Oh yeah, they really do. Really, really do. I'm still we'll have to do something on the stars one day and talk about like all the Hollywood mess. Like I have some thoughts on all that. But yes, as far as this document goes, this is just one of the many drafts they're putting forward, and it gets a little bit more refined each time. But I do believe this is the second draft that was done in July of 2022. And I mean, right off the bat, as soon as you get to the preamble, just in the preamble, it starts using these words like equity, like, number one, reaffirming the principle of sovereignty of states in international cooperation to address public health matters, notably pandemic prevention, preparedness, response, and health systems recovery. And then number two, recognizing that equity should remain as a principle, an indicator, and an outcome of pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Just those two right there are ominous enough in their own right, if you really think about what they mean by things like equity and
Oh,
sovereignty.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and as you say, now we've gone on to page 3, and I was wrong about the date, but 13th of July, just to be accurate. I've put a link to this in the description of this video, to this PDF, and there may be later drafts of it, but we certainly get the idea when they barely got into the text proper, and it's reaffirming the principle of sovereignty. And you see, anytime people come to you and sort of say, "We'll give you something you already have," or like, "Oh, you don't need to worry that we're going to take this away from you," then you should be like, "Well, who said anything about taking that away from us?" So, like the fact that you're sort of saying, "Oh, don't worry, we wouldn't," we're reaffirming, "Oh, you can hold on to that. Oh, don't worry." Then you have to wonder, like, why is there a need to have it discussed at all? And then second thing, then we recognize that equity, not just we recognize, just, and I'm trying to think of the grammar term, no pronoun, I suppose, um for who it is that's recognizing. It's just in general the passive verb, recognizing, the continuous present of the passive verb, recognizing that equity should remain as a principle. Oh, yeah, remain, because we've always held that dear to our hearts. So don't take our precious equity away from us. Oh, no.
Yes. And, equity in itself inherently is going to mean, taking away rights of people, because, to give someone an equal start, just from wherever they were born. That's kind of like the principle of meritocracy. Whatever gifts you were given from born, when you were born, whether you're rich or poor, you have the same options to pursue as anyone else. You might have more difficulties put in your way based on who you are, what family you were born in, whatever, but you could be a doctor if you want to be. You might have to work harder than that rich guy, but you could do it, right? What they mean by equity is making sure that even if you're an absolute dumbass, you could be a doctor one day. And that's not necessarily what we want, as far as I'm concerned. I don't want, like, especially when you're talking about doctors, lawyers, and these really important professions, do you want just somebody who's there because, like, they were the right color or they had the right genitalia? I don't care. Like, I don't care one way or the other. I want the best of the best.
Well, of
Right?
course, isn't it amazing that they used to say, of course, that they only wanted people to be judged by the content of their character, and I suppose if you were to have a doctor, you'd want to just judge him on his ability to doctor you up a bit. But it is they themselves. Of course, they're the real hypocrites. I won't say the R word this early in the stream, but they're the real hypocrites. I'll say, but at the same time, a guy who I really, only got to start listening to in the last year or so, really, didn't really know him that well when he was doing Anthony and Opie show, but Anthony Cumia, anyway. Recently enough, I think he was talking about airline pilots, and I suppose it's in the context of there's a quota hire or diversity equity guy who he himself loves equity, but I don't think he really understands it. Yeah, he had a chart. I'll see if I can play the video in a little while. He had some kind of diagram that showed people standing on boxes and then people standing on different boxes somewhere else. And he was being asked to explain what this meant, and he couldn't really even explain it either. But he just knows that he loves it. And why wouldn't he? Because like most people who don't really have any sense of anything outside of themselves, if he feels he's going to benefit from it, then it's a good thing. And it's not just that he feels like, well, he likes it because it suits him. He just thinks, well, it must be universally good because it makes me feel good. Anyway, he's going to be, the way it seems that it's going, he's going to be the new chief of the Federal Aviation Authority. And I saw him being asked on this video a lot of different questions about, what would be the rules and regulations. He said, look, I'm not a pilot. I wouldn't know any of that stuff. That was basically his answer. And it didn't seem to trouble him in the slightest that he didn't know, and nor did he even seem to realize that he was being exposed for the fool and the sort of danger to himself and others that he is. He seemed to be pleasantly oblivious to it all. But as Anthony Cumia said anyway, he said, look, I don't like the way that all these airlines, like Delta there apparently has an ad, and so does its partner, international partner across the Atlantic, Virgin Atlantic Airways. They have an ad demonstrating how their air hostesses are really air stewards. They're all air stewards, and sometimes non-binary air stewards and all this sort of thing. And they think that's a lovely thing. We're all kind of go, well, fantastic. The 13-hour flight I was going to take there, I was not looking forward to it until I realized that the airline provided non-binary air stewards, and they have such fun up and down, like up and down the Oz, fantastic. Well, like the Delta one has something similar where it's like loads of diverse women there doing TikToks on the runway, and he's like, listen, I don't want my airline to be fun. I want my airline pilot. I want to, if he flies first class, he says sometimes the doors open. He says, look, I want to see my airline pilot be a sort of a 40 to 65-year-old white man with grey hair and a mustache. That's what makes me feel secure, And if other people are allowed to have feelings about things, that's how I feel about it, I'm not going to feel very nice in first class. Not that I am. He was talking about himself. If I don't see the guy with the grey mustache, going in there, and he says he has to look basically exactly like that fellow who landed the plane in the Hudson River. That's the guy I want flying my plane, not some sort of Beyonce type woman TikToking up and down the runway and then getting into the cockpit. Anyway, there's a bit of a diversion there, but I'll see if I load up the video a bit later. But it's that idea that good God, how is it that we find ourselves saying, but no, I thought you liked, to have it where it was the person who was best for the job, and they kind of go, yeah, well, forget all that. This guy looks the part. So it's going to be the same, whether it be for flying or lots of other what they might term to be sort of critical infrastructure of the nation and of our civilization. So spoken a bit at length there, but I think you'll definitely be able to add on
Yeah.
your thoughts about that, JC.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that it's all part of the plan, 100%. And it's like I was telling you earlier, and I've mentioned on stream, they don't necessarily want all of society to like go full on, 100% as far left as they can get right off the bat. That's not where they're trying to go. What they're trying to do is scare everyone into accepting just a little bit more tyranny. And then in another 10 years, they'll start going the rest of the way. They know they can't get this jump all at once, but they can cause chaos and scare you to death and make you think it's going to be this way. And what you'll wind up with is like kind of halfway there, halfway in between. It's if you notice, there was this whole Blair White situation. This girl started, a conservative girl started going off and talking about thirst trap this and all. And it kind of is. Blair is being toted around on all these conservative platforms, and he's been doing those rounds. He's been pushed in the conservative media, and the truth is he is transgender, and that is like the transgender agenda has been meant to push the transhuman agenda. And in a way, yes, it's got, like, you see how many of them come out to defend Blair. So right there shows you that the conservative movement has moved from where they were, right? 10, 20 years ago, they would have never like supported such a thing. Even if Blair came out and like agreed with them, they'd still be like, well, no, like, we're religious, etc., etc. We ain't doing that. Well, now it's not so. Now the Overton window has moved, and all of this is going to move it yet again. And all of it will be going towards this equity and inclusion that they talk about, like, and which is absolute just hiring whoever because they fit the best look, which is contradictory as all get out if you listen to what they say they believe and then look at what they actually do, which I would argue is the thing that you need to look at when it comes to anybody. Christ would agree as well. Look at the fruits of somebody's actions, and it will tell you who they are, right? So, like, just notice how everything they say, they seem to actually do the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I have it queued up here. There's maybe two I really want to play, but I'll start off with this one anyway. Seeing as you brought it up, because I think it is relevant, right? It'll get us into this a bit here as well. About the nomination. Maybe people aren't aware of it. So the nomination guy, the guy who's nominated for the job of FAA, and it's a Senate Commerce Committee holds a hearing on the nominee to be the administrator of the FAA. And I do find that, like I mentioned last week, that I noticed. Maybe it's the first time I mentioned it, I think last week, but I noticed quite a lot in the corporation that I worked for, that they are able to make other people suffer, and weaponize other people's stupidity against others, and they never seem to be the individuals themselves, nor the people who promote them up into these higher positions. They never seem to suffer for their incompetence and their stupidity, and their unsuitability for the job. It's always the people sort of, I suppose, below them, and that'll be, and in the case of this guy, it'll be everybody who might be in a plane ever, or even on the ground somewhere where a plane might land on them, or crash into their house. So I'm going to play this, and it gives us an insight. People talk about failing upwards as well. Like, this guy just fails upwards all the time. And I suppose many years ago, like, I began to realize what this was happening, and I began to get very concerned, but I'm talking about several years ago. Of course, concerned is too weak a word now to describe the feeling of, like, what's going to happen to our society. Like, a society can tolerate to some extent people. I think I was going to say, being promoted to a position beyond their competency level. And I remember learning that was called the Peter Principle. And it used to be, I think, the Peter Principle stated that people are always promoted to one level above their competency level, because it takes doing that to discover that they're not competent or suitable to the job that they actually have, because they got there by knowing the right people or sucking up to the right people rather than just being chosen on merit, because that's, there was always a certain amount of that nepotism and all this sort of stuff. But now it seems like that for the last, I would say, put it at nearly 10 years, that there has been zero meritocratic promotion at all anywhere in any of the Western world. And I've seen several countries. But anyway, do you want to say a bit on that, and then I'll load up this FAA guy?
Well, I mean, yeah, sure. It's meant to be that way. It's that slow tiptoe towards tyranny that you like always hear about. All of this has had to been done, one step at a time, slowly but surely, just like what I was talking about, where they try to force in something really extreme, and then they're like, okay, we won't go that extreme. How about just about half of that? How's half of that sound? And everybody's like, oh, all right, well, we'll take that. People have been trained in the Western world specifically to choose the lesser of two evils. We've become incredibly comfortable with this lesser of two evils thing, and we are going to have to get it through our head that lesser of two evils is still evil. And they will, Lucifer comes as an angel of light. They always will try to sell you on it by acting like they're there to help, but they're, like you were saying earlier, they're the ones who caused the problem in the first place. And just like this treaty here, this treaty will, presume to fix problems, but you're going to wind up with far more problems out of it than what you fixed, if you fix it.
Yeah. And I suppose before playing this, I'll say hello to Jamie Hillier there, Jamie Hillier Rubis, and Shadow says, Shadow Mask 1995, he says, now I'm familiar with Brett Cooper, but not that familiar. And I've seen her, I suppose, as she's become famous, particularly over the last, I guess, 6 months or a year. But maybe she's been at it for much longer than that. And Blair White, I'm also familiar with, but I haven't really seen that much of her lately. So I don't know exactly what she was talking about. But I think I've seen her once before, acknowledging that even though it's kind of good that she's able to, in a certain way, say some things that she wouldn't ordinarily be able to say because of the fact that she's transgender, whatever, but that the left definitely hate her because she's not on message, but she's not helping necessarily either because she's kind of part of the problem or whatever, So I get that there's sort of a conflict there. Anyway, Shadow says Daily Wire keeps pushing Brett Cooper as a thirst trap. Yeah, it is incredible. Oh my God, it's a woman, and she's saying based stuff that all of us know and have said many times over. But she's on the YouTubes, and she's got 1 million followers or whatever, and she's saying it as well, ha ha ha, and she's so pretty or whatever. The funny thing is, I wouldn't want to knock her looks, but I don't know. She kind of pretty. It's difficult to say. She has rugged features in a way that she doesn't have makeup on. Maybe she'd look more rugged. I don't know. But I don't want to criticize her, But I think she might admit the same herself. that it's basically just like any woman who's saying anything vaguely based. It's like, oh my God, wow, can't believe it.
Well, with someone like Blair, it's the fact that he is a transgender person, and
well, there you are. A slow burn is saying she, and you're saying he. So fair enough. You're being accurate or whatever.
Well,
I suppose
that's what he calls himself. So, Blair does call himself a he. So,
does he? Oh, I didn't know that. All right. Okay. So Blair White says that he's a man. Does he?
Yeah, he admits that he's a man. That's one of the reasons that's what I was saying. That's one of the reasons the conservatives have picked up on him is because, okay, yes, he dresses like a girl, but he still admits, look, dude, I'm a man, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing, though. it's one of those things that even if they don't get the leftist shit they want, they're going to be able to get the right to move their Overton window in order to defeat the enemy. It's kind of one of these, it's just one of these inevitable rules that when you go to war with somebody, you to some degree take on, you know, some of their attributes and you use some of their weapons against them, right? It's just one of those things that always happens. And
Yes.
what the conservatives are doing is they're just doing what's logical without really thinking it through. Like, you know, yes, it's logical. You have somebody that would be perceived on their side that is willing to come to your side and espouse your point of view. But is it really your point of view, or is it just
Yeah.
part of your point of view? You know,
Yeah. Well, look, there's a whole load of conflicting feelings. I think that most of us would probably have about people like I can't think of his name now. Damn it, I thought I had it there. Dave Rubin, right? So like that. Oh yeah, he says loads of really based. Totally, he got him. Like he totally destroyed that libtard's argument. And at the same time, then like he's a man, but he's married to another man, and they've just had twins or something. And you're like, oh, okay. I'd rather if they were my political complete opposite, right? So it'd be great if they were the left, right? Which at some point in the past maybe they were, but actually in the past there was no such thing as a man married to another man, and then expecting twin babies, you know. So that to me, I don't know. Like I'm not sure even now if I could answer the question of I'd rather do without him entirely. Right? I don't know. Right? It's a very strange thing, just by way of example, I suppose, isn't it?
yeah, well, I mean, it's just like with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a classical liberal, but what channel is he on? He's on a conservative channel, like being pushed as a conservative. Well, what does this end up doing? Well, this ends up turning the conservative party into the classical liberal party of 10 or 20 years ago.
Yes.
An
Yeah, that's it.
alchemical transformation taking place, and they don't see it happening. And
Oh
that's
yeah. I mean, the
stuff I worry.
political yeah, the Overton window, as they say, has moved incredible amount, such that the conservatives are now the liberals, and the leftist and liberals are entirely different things. And in fact, we just didn't realize. I suppose I wasn't politically aware. Really, I didn't think I needed to be. Even I don't know. I suppose even 10 years ago, I might have found it difficult to distinguish between leftists and liberals. But anyway, um, uh, say hello there anyway to Shadow, and he's talking about Brett Cooper, and he's saying, yeah, she does. And I think a lot of people said that, and I agree. Like, it's strange. There seems to be a similarity. I don't know quite what it is. Is it that she looks like Ben Shapiro with makeup on and long hair? It's not quite that. But is she related to? I don't know. Um, and Dr. Crispy Johnson is there. So look, we'll be reading through this. Like I think he was saying he's not actually a medical doctor. Um, but in any case, like, it's always good to have a doctor in the house. Um,
Right.
yeah. So look, I'm going to play this anyway of the FAA, right? Because it's just relevant. It's very relevant to what the kind of the attitudes of what's going on, I suppose. And again, like I find it sometimes that I mess up with trying to share the audio or not. I'm going to mute my mic and I'm going to play this. But I'll be watching the comments to see if they can't hear. So if it's muted, let me know. If you can't hear any audio, let me know. So I'll play this anyway.
For you to explain what this means.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, we advocated and supported equity in a big way at LA Metro and every organization that I have been a part of. I think it's crucial for us to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what you're looking at is equity with everyone on a level playing field, if you will. And that is what we espoused at every organization that I've been in, especially LA Metro.
And what do these boxes represent, I guess? I mean, they're, equality here, they have different sized boxes, and then here there are different boxes here. I'm just curious what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah. Well, that is, opportunity, if you will, opportunity, and how you position people that may be less fortunate for the same opportunities that other people might receive.
Okay. I got to say, Mr. Washington, I appreciate the attempt at an explanation there, but I don't fully understand why equality and equity are different. I would assume that equality of opportunity is something that we all believe in and agree with.
Mhm.
I worry just in some of your public comments and some of the things that you've said, you tend to take this focus of explicitly saying that color blindness, of looking at people without regards to skin color, is somehow in and of itself discriminatory. I was hoping to elucidate that a little bit by appeal to this chart and try to understand it a little bit better. But I have to be honest, and I'm not trying to be rude, Mr. Washington. I just don't fully understand what this is meant to convey and how it might influence some of your policies. In an effort to kind of drill down to that, I just want to ask just a few questions here, because the aviation industry is maybe the single industry where aptitude and where safety matter more than almost anything else. I mean, I can't imagine even going under the knife. I'd probably choose having a safe pilot as more important than even going under the knife for a surgery. I just want to ask sort of how this criticism of color blindness that you've had in some remarks in your career intersect with how you think about the standards for pilots that exist in the aviation industry. So a few just very direct questions. Do you believe that white, black, and blue airline pilots should be able to read, speak, and understand English before becoming commercial airline pilots?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. Do you believe white, black, and Latino airline pilots should have to hold the commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating as they currently have to do?
Yes, I do.
Great. Do you believe that white, black, and Latino airline pilots should have to have at least 1,500 hours of total flight time in order to receive an airline transport license?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Washington. I appreciate that, and here's the reason why I ask those questions, because there is an inconsistency between some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric on the one hand, and the fact that we should hold everybody to equal standards no matter what. I have 3 young children: a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. A couple of their grandparents live in San Diego, California, so they're on a flight a couple times a year at least. I'm actually totally supportive of what you might call a Rooney Rule here. I absolutely believe that if we take black citizens or white citizens or anybody who hasn't had the same opportunities as everybody else, it's great to make that extra effort to ensure that they have the opportunity to become commercial airline pilots or federal administrators or whatever the case may be. What I worry about is that some of our aviation industry, some of the experts and some of the ideas centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion seem to take the idea that we should relax standards in an effort to promote certain groups of certain racial or gender categories. And I just think that's a terrible, terrible way to run an airline industry. I don't really care whether the pilot that I have, what their gender is, what their skin color is. I just care about whether they can do the job. And I hope that you're committed to the same exact attitude, because if we don't have safe airline pilots and if we relax the standards in an effort to get pilots of a certain skin color or a certain gender, it's going to be disastrous, quite literally. Thank you.
Well, just had to switch back on my mic there. So, all this diversity stuff, and him being like sort of, he's slightly concerned, like he just thinks it's a bad way to run an airline. That's all. He's only concerned that the airline mightn't make enough profits. And like, see, he's really being very gentle with him, isn't he? Like, he's just concerned. It all seems like such an understatement. By the way, sorry, my mic sounds like it's very loud now. I don't know. Let me know if oh, it's okay. Is it all good? Okay. So yeah, I think it infuriates me more than anything else. It terrifies me. And I've seen so many things. As I say, from my experience working in large multinational corporations, where people well beyond their competency level get promoted. And a corporation, I noticed, could handle a certain amount of that. But when it's so top heavy that all the nincompoops are up at the top, and I would see like that the grunts, let's say, like to use sort of military parlance, like they just get the job done one way or another, and they'd sort of engage in this kind of falsifying of documentation, of method statements, work done, spreadsheets. Just let the people up above know, hear what they want to hear, but just get the thing done as well, and whatever, find a way. They set us rules, but we find ways to get around them, and we just get what they want done anyway, done, even though they don't know what they want done. And you find that there's about a team of 10 people being managed by maybe 100 people over 5 different departments, being told to do different things, countermanding things. It is a comedy of errors, but it's not funny anymore. That's the thing. Now listen, we have gone down this road here as a tangent because we got straight into the old equity, but I'll have to let you have your say there on what you think of this madness. It reminds me of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned, I'll say Dr. Crispy Johnson, or How I Learned to Love the FAA, Stop Worrying and Just Love the New FAA Overlords.
Yeah, well, it's all by design that they do this. That little diagram of the boxes, that's that diagram basically says it all. Like, right now, like a meritocratic society is one in which, okay, doesn't matter how tall each of the boys are, they get the same size box, right? Under equality, even if like the other two guys are shorter, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets the same size box to stand on, and maybe the others have to stand on their tippy toes rather than standing flat-footed to see over the fence. Whereas with equity, what happens is you give the taller guy a shorter box, and then you give the shorter people taller boxes based on what things they lack, right? So from their outlook, this is going to be a situation of, okay, well, if this pilot, it comes from a community that is, like a BIPOC community that is, we perceive as oppressed, or, having to go through more trouble societally than anyone else, then we're going to push them to the top and give them a boost according to how much they feel they've been suppressed, right? So rather than starting everyone off the same line, it's giving certain people a handicap so that it brings everyone to the same level, even if their skills aren't on the same level.
Absolutely. And, like my parents used to sort of say, like, before they became, well, my father anyway, he was always telling me about how bad communism was before he became a statist himself. But, he just sort of said communism is chopping everybody off at the knees so that you're all equally disabled. And, what this lovely little diagram here means in the real world is holding back people who are capable of doing jobs so as to favor people who aren't, because, hey, they need to feel good about themselves, and the consequences for society at large be damned. And as I say, in a corporation, or then, extrapolate that out to a wider society, there's a certain amount of, I suppose, not just dead weight, but what you have to realize is these people aren't just dead weight, because when they're in charge of things, they are actually, if you had a four-wheel car, if one of your wheels was locked up, you might still be able to drive home on that. But I mean, if you keep just disassembling parts, then the thing obviously falls apart. And we're way beyond that stage where we just have one or two malfunctioning components of the vehicle known as our civilization. So it has been bit by bit, and I just think that before 2020, I was pretty well convinced that we were well beyond the stage where more of our society was deteriorated, degraded, and deliberately sabotaged, I'll say. So there was more of that than there was any working vestiges of it left. All in the name of, they claim, making people feel better. They don't actually say that. They say giving people a fair chance, an equitable chance, because they've always been held back. Well, they were held back for a good reason, because they weren't capable of doing the jobs, and it wasn't good for society at large. But they pretend to these people, they appeal to their egos and their sense of being hard done by. that it's not your fault you weren't born with enough brains to do anything useful. So therefore, we'll promote you to be in charge of the whole nation.
Yeah. Well,
So
they
they appeal
use
to
things
people's
that
sanity like
actually
that.
they use things that actually did happen on both sides in order to further this, you see. Like, because here in America, for instance, there is, to some degree, there was an effort to gentrify neighborhoods, to hold people back. There's COINTELPRO with importing the FBI importing drugs into certain neighborhoods to destroy the Black Panthers and these other things. Like, these things did happen, but other things were done to other groups of people to hold them back as well. Like, that's what they're missing. Both sides are like, they can see things from their perspective, but not the other's perspective. I can see both
Yeah,
perspectives, but the problem is the proposed solutions to fix these things are back asswards, and they're meant to be. They're meant to be, because if they're back asswards enough, everyone will lose faith in their governments. They'll lose faith in each other, and they'll hand all the power off to the WEF and all these other, NGOs and scientists and whatever, and we'll let them run things. They'll
yeah.
say,
And
"These
as I was
are the
gonna
smart ones."
just say the last thing there again, I missed your last sentence.
I said they'll say, "Oh, well, we're the only smart ones. We're the only ones
Oh yeah.
qualified
Oh,
to be able
exactly.
to
Yeah.
do this."
Yeah. And look, as I was going to say there, which totally fits in with what you're saying, is that of course, right, the stated reasons like, oh, we just want everybody to have a fair crack at the whip, or maybe that's a bad phrase for it. But they claim, oh, we just want to be, lovely to everyone, give everyone equal equity and all this. No, like their intention very obviously is they want to subvert and destroy and dismantle our societies, so that, as you say, they can say, well, look, we're the only competent people, the World Economic Forum, or the World who are we forum, right? Or the
Yeah.
world whatever, right? And I'll tell you this, like the way that it was and the way that I absolutely felt about it, they did the trick already on me when I was younger, and my parents and everybody else pretty much, they said, or they more or less allowed us to form the conclusion, which was correct, that our own national politicians were both stupid and corrupt. And it was just always, I could never figure out whether it was more that they were more stupid or that they were more corrupt, but they didn't mind being thought of as stupid. Of course, my ego would never allow. I would want to always let people know, oh no, I'm not stupid. I'm just very crooked. That's all. Very intelligent. That's why I'm ripping you off. Whereas the politicians don't mind. And anyway, it was a bigger plan, because the EU then was able to say, look, you've had this economic coalition for a while. Why not make it so that we have our own USA over here in Europe? And that, I can tell you that to my own ego, as well as most other people's, that fed into our ego as well. Yeah, we want to be just as good as the USA. We want to be, we actually kind of felt like we wanted to be a federated, united Europe. Not just for the benefits of being able to free travel between countries, without passports, but because it genuinely did appeal to our egos. And we said to ourselves, each one of us, we only found this out later, because we all felt like our politicians are parochial and stupid and backwards and non-sophisticated, whereas those lovely ones, and we figured they'd be in like Germany or Strasbourg, or somewhere in, maybe, well, not Switzerland, but maybe Austria. We just thought, look, the Germans, they're very efficient, right? And maybe some French, they're definitely going to be much more efficient and clever and honest than our, sort of sly little Slovene politicians. But that's what everyone in Belgium and Netherlands and even Germany was thinking. They were thinking, look, the British are very proper and upstanding. They'd never cheat. We'd like them to be able to control us. So we all assumed, without even looking, that whatever politicians we would get in the center of this continental power mass, we thought that they'd be more clever and more honest. But of course, no, it just makes the problem exponentially worse, because you can never get to them to sort of say, call into their local candidate's office or candidacy office and say, here, you promised this, but you're doing the opposite. And look at them square in the eye and say, are you incompetent or are you corrupt? Which is it? But you can't do that anymore. So same thing now. We now understand why it's bad. why I think Americans are beginning to realize why it's bad to have a federated consortium or conglomeration of states. We've really gone off on a tangent, but I'll have to then let you sort of chime in on that, and then maybe we'll get back to The other
Mm.
people, not the FAA, but the sort of aspect of the world emergent global governance, JC.
Yes. Well, I mean, you got, dead on the money there. That's the whole game. The whole thing is they're betting that you don't see the same puppeteers are pulling the puppet strings over there as are over here. It's the same thing that you're running in with the UKR situation down there. They don't care if they have to firebomb that country out of existence in order to get what they want. They will do it. And it's kind of the point, because once they firebombed everything into a puddle, they now can, have to pay to, it's like, oh, well, we can loan you the money, Mr. Ukraine, to, beat them and rebuild up your country into a smart country, quote unquote, with all the newest technology and stuff. But, I believe it was you had said, like, that means they'll own them. They will own them outright. And I mean, that's kind of the things that you're going to start seeing here. And that's what I'm worried about with this stupid pandemic treaty, is that, the language is here that with just a few right pulls of the strings, like, they could completely undermine your country and you would have no recourse. There's
Well, that gets us.
way to take it to court, like you were saying, and being like, hey, this is no, no, what's going to happen is you're going to get bulldozed, and by your local authorities, sort of like people in Australia and other places in New Zealand have had to quickly understand. They figured out real quick, just like the UK has, that you very much are still subjects of the king, and the new king is in town, and he's not playing no games. So he immediately put all of the Commonwealths under the same law, pretty much. Like, that Commonwealth stuff don't mean nothing. You're still part of the British Empire, folks. Wake up.
Right. Well, what you were saying there gets us nicely back anyway to this, who are you, who document, and because I suppose people might look at something like this and say, look, it's just an aspirational document. And a lot of documents were signed. I seem to remember there was something that might have been signed in Morocco or thereabouts, where it was it was just an international memorandum. There was no legal, it wasn't legally binding. It was just an understanding that people were signing up to, like, to sort of say, we agree with the principles and the sort of shared ideals that are outlined in it. But I mean, that's just, it's a bit like sort of saying, look, okay, we have a noose there, and the animal it's on the ground. The animal has put his foot or his leg into it, and look, we haven't tightened the noose around the leg. We haven't sprung the trap. It's just that he agrees in principle that, like, if he puts his leg there and we put the hoop around it, like, it's all just, it's a bit like, I suppose, maybe like training a dog, getting him used to having a collar near him first, and then around him but not tight, and all this sort of stuff, And then later on, of course, it probably only took a year before they said, look, everybody has signed up to this. All the nations, right? Any good nations, any nations that actually have, like, decency, well, they've all signed up to it. Now it's just a formality that we ratify it and put it formally into law. This is just updating. It's just to try to dot the I's, cross the T's. It's just formally recognizing what we've done by de facto, because we already agreed, made it like 10 years ago. We already signed up to this, notionally, So all this is doing is copper fastening what we already believe, It's a bit like, if people are living together for 10 years, you might as well just acknowledge that you're married, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would remind people that those Paris Climate Accords were the same way. They were just a tacit agreement, quote unquote. That is one of those things. So, we don't have to do it. It's not legally binding, but at the same time, like, you see, they treat them like that. They treat these treaties like they were legally binding. Like, oh my God, why did you not do that? And like, why are these nation states not complying with the pandemic or the climate accords and blah, blah, blah. They'll say on one hand that they're not that important, and it's just, they're just kind of like lofty goals we would like to get to, these are things that must be done and will be done,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
which is
And you know, these days, I mean, like I can tell already that like whether something is just a policy, you know, like say the things that you had to wear over your face and all that, like, you know, that was never law, but it was a policy, and it was a policy that lots of that basically any publicly accessible place, pretty much any supermarket, whatever, that they weren't mandated, but they just sort of said, look, it's best practice. It's because we care and we have an abundance of caution and all this sort of stuff. So it became a de facto law that was enforced. And I can tell you that corporations, and again, I'll state definitively, you know, I don't necessarily know the name of the top holding corporation, but there is a corporation that has taken over all the governments and nations of the world. And whatever the name of that corporation is, it's now setting corporate policy. And so, like, pretty much already, even regardless of this document, whether it gets signed, ratified, notarized into international law, whatever, well, it kind of doesn't matter because it will only have been a formal recognition of what actually occurs now, which is that at the top of all this, and I'll say the word ESG, environmental, social governance, that's the name for the top down cascading corporate policy that they just implement. And they more or less just sort of say, nobody's getting any funding unless you do what we tell you anyway. And that because everybody works for a corporation, that dictates then what are the cultural rules, the norms of our societies that people follow. So, you know, while we absolutely need to definitely stop this in whatever way we can, I want people to understand how serious it is and the way that they operate, and that they will sort of say, "Oh, this is just policy. Oh, this is just international best practice. Oh, it's just industry standard practice." You know, so they'll get around to that way and pretend like it's not really law, it's not a rule, guy, but then it is. And what's the difference? And what you find is the difference is whether people obey it or not. I remember like there's all these laws, and look, I'm not a legal guy, but I once mistakenly thought that de jure meant like as in the day, but it means to like from adjudicating or jury or from a judge if they issue an edict. Well, if nobody follows it, then it's just sort of moot or null or irrelevant. And you know, they can, I suppose, make these laws, which they will. But I know it sounds trite. It requires people to follow it. And that's the big magic trick, I suppose, that all of this stuff is just kind of binds us up, but we
Yeah.
don't have to follow it, and we need a bit of bravery there. What about that, JC?
Yes. Well, see, what a lot of the problem, where a lot of the problem comes in is people don't realize that you're already committed to it by just the fact of the, like, we owe them money, right? It's like I was talking about, this has already happened to the United States and Australia and New Zealand and Canada and everywhere else. Basically, you go to these, you know, these world overlords, which is the International Bank of Settlements. And, you know, anytime you have a major disaster, or anytime any of the member states have a major disaster or anything like that, they go begging to the overlords, and the overlords who own their central banks print them some money and, you know, take care of it, make sure everything's good. Well, the problem is, like, look, for America example, for example, I'll talk about my own country here. We have gotten to the point where everything that we have is, you know, the company might be, you know, the headquarters might be here, but all the manufacturing is taking place in places like China or Indonesia or Taiwan or something like that, another NATO member state, right? Well, guess what happens if we don't comply with these little treaties that we do? Well, they punish us. They say, oh, well, we're not going to loan you any more money. We're not going to kind of send in our white helmets, which is, you know, a whole nother thing. I believe those are an international tea organization, but whatever. But either way, like, they threaten you. It's just like if you, on the regular person level, if you have like a house and a mortgage and a car payment and all these kind of things, if they debank you, you lose everything, right? Well, it's exactly the same on the international level with countries and these central banks, these, you know, the Bank of International Settlements. We have a lien put on, like, we all have liens put on our country because we owe them money, we owe them this, we owe them that, we signed treaties and all this other kind of stuff. If you don't comply, they quite literally, like, can cut you off. But now this pandemic treaty here, will give them even more power, which means that anytime something happens that can be perceived as a pandemic, they get to make the last call on what is or is not a pandemic. They get free reign over your country. If they think that there might be a pandemic breaking out somewhere, all of a sudden you're going to see these UN people all over the place, traipsing all over your private property, testing the soil and all that kind of stuff. And I guarantee you, I couldn't find the last copies of this stuff, the one that Bermas was referring to. But I bet you, if you can get a hold of that final copy, that somewhere in there it says that if the land is found to be polluted, that they can take it from you.
Right. Well, you've really gotten into the nitty gritty of it there, and look, to sort of take back a bit when I sort of said about we just don't have to follow it. Like, and I mean, basically everybody who works in every corporation, they should be the cog that refuses to turn. But of course, they've stuffed the ranks with people who just sort of say, if I get paid, I'm doing it. Whatever the corporation says, that means that it must be moral and good, because if the corporation wouldn't be paying me otherwise. And of course, everybody's just self-serving and doesn't think that they have a duty to the greater good, or even though they'll claim that that's the central tenet of their great society that they're trying to build, which is just communism. But the focal point that you've really got to there anyway is that there'll be no arguments about it, and they won't feel the need to pause even for a second anymore. Every single worker will just sort of say, oh, that's old hat. There's no discussion to be had anymore. It's just the law. It's obvious. Like, in the same way as, I suppose, like, I mean, to most Europeans, it's absolutely mind-blowing that there's such a thing as jaywalking. Although there is a mild aspect of that in some places in Europe, but in some states anyway, in the US, like, where there'd be no car in sight, but if you don't cross at a regular crosswalk, whatever, that it's jaywalking, and like police will arrest you or fine you, whatever. That's just outrageous. But people are used to it, so they don't discuss it. It's just the law, has been for so long, and that's the way they want to have it with this, where there'll be a generation of people born who will just kind of go, well, that's obvious, that's the law. Just same as you can't kill anybody, you can't steal anything. Of course, if the land's polluted, they just get to bring us somewhere else. Why wouldn't they? Like, it's just totally, that's why, and here it is, like, everyone knows that's the law. It just becomes the worst kind of, I suppose, de facto law, where it's written down, but it's an everybody knows thing. And that's the danger of it here. And we'll have a read through the document now and see what we can see, but we'll get a general gist of the way that these people are, how subversive it is, how insidious they are, and how they always play this sort of slithering game of, we just want to harmonize our laws so there's no confusion anymore. And so that, like, when the terrible thing happens, that we're not arguing about, like, who has precedence over who, and which international group may or may not have the sort of right to supersede or override or countermand anything that just a mere local president somewhere in some country like USA or whatever it might be, might want to say, or say, well, my citizens don't agree and we have this constitution. We want it absolutely crystal clear before that we pull the same thing off the next time, that we hold in our hands a piece of paper that says, we are the king, we are the supreme ruler. That's basically what this is about. And so I suppose we've been going for about an hour now. We'll get into maybe reading a bit of it, JC. How about if I read the first couple of paragraphs, and we'll get through it a bit, and we might just, even if it's not in this, we might find one another time, but we'll certainly get a good sense of where they're at, right? So this is on page 3. Working draft presented on the basis of progress achieved of a WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument on, I'll skip off that word, PP, something prevention, preparedness. So that's another word they love, and response. The WHO CAII, which stands for, I better look up to see what I forget what it stands for, but I'll tell you now in a second anyway. It stands for, damn it. Do you happen to know off the top of your head what it stands for, CAII?
I think that's just the name of the bill, is the CA+2 or something like that. The name of this, the name of the document or whatever. I do believe. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I think it might have been Committee on Action of International something or other. Damn it, and I had it earlier and I just forgot what it was, but it's along those lines, I think, of committee. action something something. Damn it! Now I'm going to have to do, because it's sort of fundamental to find out what it stands for. It might be it might be commission
There we go. The title.
on inter. Yeah, you have it.
You know, you know, a convention, agreement, or other international instrument.
Instrument, international instrument. And look, again, I'm not a law guy, legal guy, but a statute is an instrument. It's a legal instrument. In other words, a legal fiction, just a magic spell or an incantation, or we said it, therefore it's true, and we talked about it, and then we resolved it, we witnessed it formally, then it's a law. But it's not really a law. So, like, there's people talk about natural law or common law. Those things might be real laws, but instruments, that's
Yeah,
all
this
just
point,
fiction.
a cudgel to beat you over the head with until you comply.
That's a great way of putting it, yeah. And definitely it would be seen that way for sure. And they'd kind of smirk at each other. As you said before, not only do symbols, but words are polyvalent, and especially when it comes to the law. But it doesn't matter that it's all fiction, because as long as they do all the sort of binding you up in all this sort of international legal red tape, people will obey it.
Yes. Like, they'll have no choice. It's one of those things that this is why I wanted to tell my story about being a Freemason and all this kind of stuff. Like, my story is integral to what everyone is going to have to do, because yes, pulling out of this is going to cause some severe pain. It is not going to be comfortable. We are going to lose our international trade networks. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, like both domestic and abroad. I mean, it will be painful as all get out, but I promise you it's not going to be as painful as the slavery that you'll be under if you let this keep going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, maybe we'll pause for a minute there, or just in a few minutes, and maybe if you want to sort of expand on maybe that, but just seeing as this is the topic, right? I'll just read a couple of these. We'll say something, and then I think it would be a nice deviation for you to tell us a bit about that. That all right? I'll read a couple of these. We'll say something on it, and then if you can, if you'd like to say a few words on that, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Like,
Okay.
people can probably do with hearing it.
Right. Well, because I'm not sure as well how visible it is on screen, but it's because this is largely an audio thing, and we've got to sort of read it into the record. So, if you can help me again out with the acronym, if you have it there, what is CAII again?
Oh, it is a convention, agreement, or other international instrument.
Okay. So, preparedness and response, the WHO Convention, Agreement, International Instrument, for the consideration of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body at its second meeting, preamble, reaffirming the principle of sovereignty of states. So in other words, put everybody at their ease in international cooperation to address public health matters, notably, I think we're getting all that words, but it's hour two anyway. Prevention, preparedness, response, and health systems recovery. Recognizing that equity should remain as a principle, an indicator, and an outcome of pandemic prevention. So in other words, if things don't look equitable, then we're not safe from germs or pandemics. That's terrifying. And we're not prepared, and we don't have a good response unless we can see as an indicator that we recognize that equity is being held up as a principle there, core principle, maybe the primary principle. Emphasizing that in order to make health for all a reality. And of course, the Democrats love to hear that, because they kind of go, oh yeah, well, we want universal healthcare. That's what to their ears, that's what they think, that's what they're hearing. Individuals and communities need access to high quality health services, skilled health workers providing, oh, well, we'll get all those, of course. We know where we're going to get them from, where we're getting them from already, south of our borders. Skilled health workers providing quality, people-centered care. Because of course, our hospitals, like previously, were canine-centered. They weren't people-centered, We hadn't invented veterinary clinics prior to this, They always state the obvious, right? And here's a tactic I'll state, right? And maybe this, maybe they have a name for this rule, right? But what I noticed is they include obvious things in their contracts to you, because if you sign them, then it's almost like you are agreeing that they provide it, that they always provided it, that they created it, invented it, and they own it, and they're giving it to you as a privilege. And that's how they do it with our rights as well, our natural rights. They sort of enumerate natural rights and then kind of pretend like they gave it to you.
Yes. And that's one of the
People-centered.
arguments I have against some of the founding documents that people love so much about our country here. It's like, yeah, well, the thing is, those pieces of paper only count if everybody's willing to agree to abide by them, and good luck keeping that over the centuries. And so too, by putting them on paper like that, you're basically stating that these, these fucktards in government, are the ones who are giving them to you. And even though it says, given by God, God given rights at the top of that up there, like, they just ignore that because they don't believe in God, right? And if most of the public don't believe in God, then that word might as well be moot when it comes to the legalities of it, right? And then it sets you up for this very situation that we're in right here. It's one of those things that I've always told people: your rights are exactly what you have the power to take and keep.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I do absolutely admire, and it's only really again, and probably in the last 10 years, that I really got to understand, why the American Constitution or amendments to the Constitution are such a shining light to the rest of the world. But the problem is, of course, as I said, if you actually enumerate them like that, people tend to form the misapprehension, which they want you to form, that it's the government giving you the rights, rather than it just being a memorandum of understanding that, yeah, we know that we've actually taken the time, because sometimes you might have this sort of slightly nebulous idea but in your mind about what it is you believe in or what's your shared culture and values. But if you write them down, it gets a bit more clear.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, though, is as we say, people tend to just think, it's just an old document, or that only applied 200 years ago. This sort of nonsense. Now, problem in England and their Magna Carta is that they did indeed, as you say, pretty much put it up to the king and said, these are our rights now. Do you agree? Otherwise, now we can depose you, or we can all go back to where we were and all learn to live together. And that was a sort of a memorandum of understanding. But again, it's always treated as, well, that's just ancient history. It's not relevant now, because I made the fatal mistake, as did I'm sure plenty of other people, thinking I'm now born in a post-history. I thought I was born post-history. Everything that happened before I was born was history. Now we live in the modern age where everybody's sophisticated. But maybe in the last 10 years only, I really fully understood that I had just been assuming that everything went without saying. In our constitution, we don't have anything that literally says you have the right to free speech or defend yourself or these kind of things, because we felt, well, it goes without saying. But it only goes without saying if you really know your own compatriots. And turns out I didn't. And it's incredible how even with sort of your best friends, and say if you have a wife or whatever, you can have maybe many years of marriage, perhaps living in a kind of blissful ignorance that you had a certain understanding. I remember, my father sort of said, like, I assumed that when I got married, it was what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. But it wasn't. It was what's mine is yours, and what's yours is also still yours. And I think, just by way of a sort of a slightly funny but not very funny example, that's what a lot of men come to a realization. And I realized that most of my compatriots and supposed fellow citizens of both the EU and this little provincial island off the coast of Europe, I assumed that we all believed in freedom of speech. It went without saying. I assumed that we all believed that we had a right to live in a meritocratic society, where you get basically only moved up in society somewhere into a position of power because you accept the responsibility you have to the rest of society. To me, I'm so embarrassed that I was so naive that no, the way it works is take what you can get for yourself and to hell with everybody else, because I'm all right, Jack. And nobody even seems to think that they need to care about what might happen to society or their nations or whatever. And their attitude is, oh, that's just all fine and dandy, but we live in the real world now. So it can be a horrible realization that you can't then at least point to a document somewhere and say, but do you not believe in this? And at least try to shame them into the sort of the religiosity of believing in the nation a bit more, you know. So anyway, sorry for going off on one there, but I wanted to sort of I suppose explain it a bit, I think, to Americans as well, while I might have the opportunity, how it is over here when you don't have anything formally written down. In other words, officially written down as to what it is that you actually believe as a core founding principle of your nation.
Yes. And that's the thing. And, you know, it happens slowly over time. Like if you keep taking in people from other countries who don't have that belief, and what I've, you know, and plus what I found is that some of them have a stronger belief in those pieces of paper than people who were naturally born here, by the way. You know, because they've been sold the dream so well over the airwaves that, like, you know, they
Yeah.
believe in the American dream full on, which was supposed to happen. That's how Western culture has been exported everywhere. They sold
Yeah.
everyone on this dream. Well, now that
I was just
everyone's
say
sold
Dinesh
on it,
D'Souza. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say to you that a very good example of that is Dinesh D'Souza. Although, look, I totally wouldn't trust him. He seems to be like a lot of people, a bit off on something there. But in any case, he absolutely says all the time that, you know, he came to America because he loved everything about the values enshrined in the Constitution of America.
yes.
Whereas people born there, a lot of them just take it for granted, don't care.
Yes, and that, you know, that's very much the way it goes. And like I said, those pieces of paper only matter if the majority of your population believe in them, right? Well, if you can slowly erode that over time to the point where, you know, people don't even understand what those documents mean, or, you know, they don't even have a basic understanding of philosophy to understand any of it, really. You know, it's just a piece of paper to them. And
Yeah.
we let this happen. But, you know, back to what I was saying earlier, like that's the problem though. All of these, like the reason I'm afraid we're not going to break away from it all that easy before all this happens is because, you know, in order to get away from this, what a country would have to do is break away from the international trade partnerships and all that kind of stuff. Like as Americans, we would have to break loose of that, let our entire system, economic system, trade networks, everything would absolutely collapse. The stores would be empty, all that kind of stuff, and we would have to start over from scratch and build it all up from the ground up again.
Yes.
Like our own manufacturing facilities, our own, you know, infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And that the problem is going to be getting people to do that because, you know, as I was saying with, you know, comparing my own story, we will lose everything. Your country will lose everything. You no bank accounts, no going to the Fed to get them to print more money, you know, none of that. You're not going to have trade partnerships. Whatever your country has within its own borders and whatever it can finagle out of another country to trade with it. And that's if these internationalists aren't torpedoing any boats or anything that might come in to help you. You know what I mean? So that's why I
Yeah.
say in your own borders, whatever your country has, that's what you're going to be working with.
Yes. And look, again, just to state, I know you've said it there, but I'm going to sort of echo back to you. Like, again, it took a long time for me to realize that the way it's exactly the way of the devil, right? And that's how they come in slithering in. And you can think of it just like the serpent in the garden, sort of saying, "Oh, I just want to help you. Well, why don't you have a bite of this?" So these people always want to make our lives more comfortable, more easy, more sophisticated. And you can also think of it in terms of making your computer more sophisticated, that it's no longer just, well, you have this sort of simple computer that you switch it on with a physical switch and it has a basic input output system and it just boots up a very rudimentary operating system. They want things then to be built on top of things. So, you know, say with programming languages, there was machine language and then assembly language, and then there was, you know, sort of what they might have called second generation languages that were able to sort of abstract it a bit more into something that was a bit like a language you might sort of think of as English or whatever, you know. And then, you know, third level languages where, you know, everything could be more like a sort of I suppose like a fully syntactical language, and then on top of that, for generating an object oriented and things where you didn't even have to use words, you could just drag and drop symbols or this kind of stuff. So that then there was a generation of programmers that never understood anything below, down to the nuts and bolts level. So same thing with our societies. So if you don't have like your own ore mining and your own like metal smelting and this kind of stuff, if you don't have your own car manufacturing, shipbuilding, if you don't build your own engines and railways anymore, and if you've shipped all these production lines over to other places like China and India, everybody should have sort of said, and I'm talking about like the boomer generation, because that's when it happened. And in England, of course, famously, like, throughout the 70s and then the 80s, whole production lines of car models were being ripped up and sent off to India. And by the way, even places in Italy, even though like during the Cold War, throughout the 60s, if there was a Fiat model in Italy, that was sort of last year's model or last 5 years ago model, they just shipped the whole production plant off to Russia or one of the production corporations over there, companies over there, one of the satellite countries, even though technically there was an Iron Curtain. So all of this are our own. I can't really blame my own parents literally, but they should have told us at least this is what was happening, and that if that is ever allowed to happen, and of course the people who work for these corporations, a lot of them were our own people as well. Of course, some of them are people who see themselves as distinct and they don't really have any loyalties to any country. But I have seen with my own eyes people who, like at certain high levels, like, general managers, directors, this kind of thing. I wonder what they think that their own children will grow up to live in. Anything more than an economic zone. And even if they do, how will they be able to even guarantee them a job, even if their father was somebody important? I don't understand how these people don't see the big picture. That if you start sort of hacking away and sending away the foundations of your own industry and civilization, that obviously then you're caught where they can just pull the rug out from underneath you. So hopefully I've kind of put that in a bit more concrete terms, in that they always pretend we just want to make things more sophisticated for you. But it's a bit like maybe labor saving devices. If there's a washing machine, if there's a baker's oven and all this sort of stuff that automatically does stuff, of course, if all your food is processed, you just buy your bread, you lose the skills how to make anything. That's the thing. I'm trying to figure out how to make my own bread and stuff like that just out of flour, but I certainly wouldn't be able to mill my own flour. But if you can't do that in your own corporation, if it only comes from China, if there's only one source of things from China, then that is a huge strategic vulnerability for everybody's nation. And that was obvious for the last 20 years. And yet nobody did anything about it. Why not?
Because partially it was because of the money. Like during the 1980s, these Wolf of Wall Street days, it was just that's what caused that, the international trade agreement that Clinton put through in, I think, 1993 was, it opened everything up. And that's when you started seeing like Walmart become these Walmart super centers with all the Chinese goods and everything. It was a matter of the fact that, okay, for the public, you're giving them super cheap goods that are, all these plastic junky goods at Walmart for, bottom dollar. They're getting stuff cheap. The people who own the corporations are making tons of money because like their labor costs, their overhead is super low. Hence why you have Chinese people jumping out of Apple's, they had to put safety nets around the buildings because, Apple employees jumping out. They're taking advantage of these countries over here while also taking advantage of their home country. And it's all for money. It's all for money. And it all comes down to what I was saying before. If you don't do this stuff, then you can think of this whole thing like a parasite that offers stuff. Like think of like a parasite that like, if you buy into it, it will make you stronger, but once you've like been bound to this parasite for so long, it kind of intertwines with you to the point where if you try to break yourself away from it, the body dies, right? You've integrated yourself into the body of something else to the point where, yes, it makes you stronger, but it has drawbacks. And if you don't like those drawbacks and you try to leave, your nation will just die. It'll shrivel up and die just like a hand that's been chopped loose from the body, and it's designed that way for a purpose. They meant for every little bit of this to happen, and that's why they signed those international trade agreements, because at the end of the day, all they do care about is profits. They have no national like loyalty or anything like that. The only thing they care about is making sure that they, as the heads of these corporations, wind up at the top of everything with zero competition and zero way for anybody to ever threaten their position again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said this word parasite, and I think again, like that's a word that they don't like, because they'll sort of say like, oh, well, that's a euphemism. But I mean, it's a very good analogy for what's happening. I mean, there's something that always worms its way up to the top. And I remember there was this chess player, Bobby Fischer, who sort of said like, I see the devil as being exactly analogous to this parasite that always worms its way in and sort of says, I just want to give you cheap shoes made in Vietnam, just trying to help you. I just want to give you a nice new shiny black screen made by Apple. And like, yeah, you've heard of some people jumping out windows, but we've put nets there, Goy. It doesn't matter. It's fine. And people know damn well. So I have to say like that it is very like the devil, because people will lock that information away and sort of say to themselves, oh, I don't need to worry about that. And of course, the thing that is slithering onto their shoulder, whether it's like a worm or a snake, it's sort of saying, don't trouble your pretty little head about who jumped out what window. All that matters now is that you tweet this, or you read that, or you upload this video or download this video, or whatever it might be, and that you feel good about yourself. So to a large extent, yes, everybody basically is guilty or culpable in some way, and that's the problem, because they have a great way of sort of saying, we can worm our way up to the top, and everybody kind of is going to be, in a way, blackmailed by what they somehow subconsciously know is their own, at the very least, lack of, I suppose, reaction, that they know in their heart of hearts that they didn't object. And I suppose that's why I've sort of said before, like it's up to every individual, at the very least, to voice their objection in whatever way that they can, and I know it's terrible as well, but none of us think that we're individually responsible, but lack of taking any responsibility to sort of say, I will engage in a certain amount of self-sacrifice for the greater good. But of course, I mean, it's a bit like with the amount of dunderheads that you're operating against, who are queuing up outside to buy the latest phone or whatever it might be. It's a bit like Germany saying, let's shut down a coal-fired power station here while China is opening 10 a week.
Yes, and I mean it's very much that, and you see all these dummies going out and buying the phones, and waiting in line for the next new iPhone and all this other kind of stuff, and spending all this money on new Jordans or whatever next consumerism fad there is, and that's really what keeps them trapped. And look at it from a politician's point of view. No matter what their intentions were when they ran, this is why voting doesn't matter. Because once you get up into the politics, and you realize it takes a certain amount of money to even run for office, and if you don't have that money, you can't run. It takes donations and all this other kind of stuff. They will come after you, try to delete you, hurt your family, debank you, do all these kind of things. And then on top of that, if you were to convince the rest of the government to do the right thing, it would absolutely mean dismantling everything and basically collapsing the entire nation, because without that constant printing of money, without those central bank money printers going brrr constantly, none of these nations can hold up. They're being propped up artificially, and as soon as those artificial props are removed, i.e. as soon as you do something they don't like, there you go. So what impetus would they have? Like, how mad would all these dummies be when they couldn't get their iPhones? Because
you're mostly right. I'm sorry, not mostly right. You're absolutely right. And I was going to say, maybe I was talking to you before about these people who do the sort of vox populi, and they ask people, questions, not only in California but in New York as well, and it's mind blowing. I mean, you'll see them in the shorts, and maybe I'll try and update the description later with links to at least two of their channels, where no matter how, like, you might have seen Jay Leno, like, in the past interviewing people, and they were really dumb and gave dumb answers to questions, but like, things have moved on an order of magnitude of stupidity. So with the stupidity comes a sort of a commensurate or attendant self-centeredness, narcissism, and greed that is unparalleled. And I think most people still, even myself, aren't able of grasping exactly how selfish these people are. Of course, young people tend to be narcissistic and self-centered, and not realize that there's necessarily any responsibility that they might have to society. But oh boy, have things moved on. And so, as you say, what I really wanted to agree with you was that not only could it not happen, but if it were to happen, that society would necessarily have to collapse, and politicians would be the most unpopular, because they would be sort of saying, I have to be cruel to be kind. It's like, the way people only like parents who say, oh, of course you can have cream cakes all the time. Oh, you want to go out late and stay out late? Doesn't matter. Come back whenever you like. Here's some money to buy drink and drugs and cigarettes and whatever you like. And then, because I'm the cool parents, but that's no good for the children. And the problem is that they that's how they weaponize most of society against us. Most people are like children who need to be, shepherded good, shepherded well. And so really they have to be denied all their excesses, but the politicians, promise them everything. Where, could you imagine if politicians said, look, we've got together, we've decided to tell the truth. Yeah, we did a lot of bad things. Here's all the bad things we did. But look, in order to fix our nation, we have to deny you any benefits. Like, forget about universal healthcare. You're getting absolutely nothing. There'll be absolutely no food cards, food stamps, social housing, absolutely literally nothing. Just like we'd have to reinvent, and as Maysmind gave some very good advice there on a lathe, and to find lathes in a scrapyard and then fix it up. Fantastic if you could do that, to rebuild societies. But people would need to be told, look, by necessity, a lot of people would have to starve to death. That's just the way. We've all grown too fat. You'll all have to tighten your belts. You'll all have to figure out a way to farm your own land. He who can't do that will have to starve, or find a useful purpose, repairing vehicles, motorbikes, bicycles, whatever, fixing roofs, anything that can help. And if you're not useful, well, then you'll have to rely on the charity of others. That's it. The government is no longer here to help you. Obviously, the politicians would know that they'd be facing the ire. I'll just say, I don't want to say anything incendiary, but facing the ire of 300 million people. So they would say to themselves, we won't do that. And the way they would rationalize it with themselves, they would say, we couldn't tell them the truth. That would be the worst thing. In fact, it would be irresponsible of us to tell them the truth, or to ever try and change the system. We have to just keep printing money, and just keep pushing the can down the road, because the alternative is unthinkable.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this. You kept asking me, why they keep going along with this. It's like, well, at a certain point, it's like, I guess they would get to where it's like, okay, well, I mean, if we were just, like you said, if they were just to come out and say it now and stop doing what they were doing, everything would fucking fall apart and bunches of people would die anyway. Right? So it's like, yeah, obviously they can rationalize it. It's one of those things that once you look at society, it's like we were talking about earlier, it becomes really hard to keep yourself from, coming to that point where you find yourself agreeing with them on certain points. It's like, but it comes down to those methods, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose I do want to mention, just to sort of get it in there, even though it seems obvious, but I want to make sure it's on the record, that Britain, when they wanted to leave the EU, they had already kind of kept their own currency. So it should, in theory, be easier to fall back, because they'd kept at least, what underpinned their own economy. But people were terrified, both British people and European people. They thought it was going to pull apart the whole EU, that everything had now been resting on all these different platforms that they'd built up bit by bit, that so many people who were sort of leftists, or didn't have a principled idea that a nation should be in control of its own destiny, in other words, have sovereignty over the decisions that affect its own citizens, they thought, oh no, we couldn't have that. And even if we wanted that in principle, that would far be a lesser concern then and I talked to so many people, like, whether they were Dutch or Germans or French, and I thought these people would very much understand from World War II, like at least their parents would have let them know that you absolutely do not want to be controlled by a foreign power,
Yeah.
and certainly not one that's basically like, well, anyway, I won't get into it. But they thought, they assumed that I would be on board with them. That it was terrible that Britain was leaving the EU or wanted to. How dare they? And I said, well, no. I mean, shouldn't a nation determine what happens to itself? Shouldn't a nation have sovereignty? And my God, they were so shocked. Some of them, like, are clutching their pearls and feeling like they were so shocked with me, like, that it looked like they wanted to call the police on me. That they were so wrong about me. They'd assumed that I was a good person. How dare I even think that the British should have control over Britain, or a say in the running of their own country. And I mentioned, of course, the fact that, like, they were being overrun by anybody who could get an EU passport, and there was a lot of people who were able to get EU passports, at least into the Schengen area, as they call it, and then straight from there to Britain. And I said, they want to have control over the people who can come into the country. Well, they got the worst of both worlds now. They're getting more and more people coming in, and not a thing has changed. Not sure if their economy has gotten any better, but definitely no better. Maybe worse. It's arguable. And of course, the leftists would say, you see, we were right, because they only ever think in terms of their own selfish gain. And of course, the inconvenience. A lot of British people had bought houses in Spain where they wanted to retire to, and they thought it might be inconvenient for them. That's all they ever think about.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been designed that way. Britain and Brexit is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Brexit isn't even proposing that, like, Britain's gonna completely stop trading with the EU or any of these kind of things. But they are still, like, I just read an article from, like, this past week that the headline was, can Britain survive Brexit? Acting as if, Brexit would just completely kill the nation. And, they're purposefully doing things since this Brexit stuff has came up to cause pain to the citizens, and then are blaming it on Brexit so as to discourage people from wanting it. So, that's the exact game that I'm talking about, like, we have to play. Like, it's a matter of, you have to break loose from them, and they're going to do everything in their power to keep you from doing that. And that includes trying to starve you to death, blockading food shipments from coming into your country, like Trump did with Venezuela, I believe. He ordered ships down there, American ships, to blockade food transports coming in, right? And like a lot of his followers, or whatever you want to call them, like, might as well call them followers, because that's the word we use for social media, which is also the word you use for cults and things too. So might as well say followers. Anyway, like, he did that. He used that same economic food warfare that the EU and the WEF and the UN, all these groups, it was the same game. It's another thing that shows you he's in on the game. He uses their same tactics against other countries. Like, it's the same thing. If you try to break away, you try to do your own thing, you try to do, like, God forbid, you do what Gaddafi did and try to mint your own gold coins. Oh no. You know what I mean? So that's a perfect example, friend. I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to touch on that. Brexit is a perfect example, because what the British people are experiencing is what everyone who tries to break away will experience. And this is just a taste of what they will do.
Yeah, well, you absolutely said it, that they economically terrorized Britain then, and they would have the capability, and they did, to make sure that there was a period after which they left where the pound sterling then became more or less as valuable, or on par, lost enough value so it was on par with the value of the euro, whereas it used to be something like, perhaps could have been as low as 70 pence would buy €1. But it came very close to parity. And so they definitely did make it so that they were economically punished for it. And, I hadn't quite thought of it in those terms, but you're absolutely right to sort of say it really wasn't all that different to how they dealt with Libya, although they didn't exactly do to whoever, like, say, I can't remember whether it was Boris Johnson, but obviously they didn't do the same thing to him as they did to Colonel Gaddafi. But the way these people think of in terms of sort of economically wiping somebody out, to them that's basically worse, because they have to then live not only in their embarrassment but in their economic what's the word for it, penury.
Yes. Yes, they have to, they have to be shamed. And, if they're alive, you can still sit there and, keep pointing fingers at them like they're some kind of circus animal. You know what I mean? You can keep printing stories about them and never let the public forget them. You know what I mean? Like every month, like you'll see a story about them talking about how awful they were, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, well, you see how the enemies of the globalists are portrayed throughout history. I mean, how many different documentaries on Funny Mustache Man and World War II are there? How many documentaries on Stalin are there? How many documentaries are on all these people that you're supposed to hate? Anyone you're supposed to hate, you're going to continually see documentaries like every year come out to remind you of the story, right? You got to
Yeah.
reinforce the story, reinforce the story.
Yeah, you're so right, and I don't remember which queen it was, but I mean it could have been Queen Elizabeth I, even that I remember reading that even back then, I never would have thought that the media or the press would have such sway over the people's opinions, or such direct power. But I would have thought it would be a soft power, but it's very direct. But even back, let's say, like in Queen Elizabeth I's time, they could have easily sort of, or I think they did have a large rabble crowd at the gates, such that it basically, unnerved the people inside the castle. And so, like, it was sort of like a show of their power, that they could set the masses against them, and then, they could either, print a nice article about them then the next day to sort of assuage the crowd and let them kind of go back then and melt away into the hinterland, or they could, put another article into the next evening's newspaper and really get this crowd riled up and shaking the gates. So again, just that really hit home to me, like how these same people who slither their way, up and around the sort of symbols of power and stand behind the thrones, that they really have this. It doesn't seem like it's a powerful weapon, but it's so powerful to be in charge of the daily newspaper, even.
Yes. Well, I mean, you look at all, like, I study history. It's what I do. It's the thing I love to study. Religion and history and philosophy. Those are my things, right? I hold those in very high esteem. And if you go back and look at history, you look at the French Revolution and the American Civil War, for example. Well, how did they pull that off? Well, France had plenty of food to get through the winter. They were not starving. Nobody was starving. No, like, they were not out of food. Yes, they had a bit of a bad harvest, but the monarchy had set plenty of grain aside to get them through. There was not going to be any problems. But the Illuminati, those upper crust members of society that had their hands on levers of power and that very ability to print pamphlets and things, they went around stirring things up and telling the public that there was no food, scared them to death, and then got them riled up, and then started, and that started the Civil War, right? It's food. Like, food is always going to be, it's a weapon. An army cannot march. It marches on its stomach, cannot march without food. A society cannot work without food. Food is the thing. Even if you read the elite's writings, they're going to talk about how important food is, right? Well, just so too, like, everybody is so ready to look at the race card when it comes to the Civil War. But no, what people should be looking at is what kind of demographic you had. Okay, in the South, where I'm from, you had families like mine that owned plantations and things like that, and they produced a lot of the grain and everything, the cotton and all this stuff that was being exported everywhere. And you have Britain that wants control of that cotton, for one, and all these other kind of things. You have religion playing a part and all that, but you also have the fact that up north, rather than the descendants of aristocrats who are running the plantations down here, that's how they make their money. Up north, you have these basically they're just industrialists. They're regular or middling sort people who have become really rich off technology and things like that. And they want control of the South. So really what it comes down to is it really, the race thing was only used in order to destroy the South. You have to understand what happens when when slavery was just outlawed all of a sudden. Well, what happened? All of a sudden now all these plantations have lost their workforce, right? They would lose their workforce, and that would completely shut down grain production for the United States for the most part. Like, I mean, it would starve so many people. So like you now put things in, it's yet another situation of the globalists maneuvering things in order to try and starve people and start wars and strife and problems. You see what I mean?
Oh,
And they'll
absolutely.
always obfuscate it by saying, oh, well, it's about equity. It's about race. It's about health equity. It's about, it's always going to be about doing some altruistic thing,
There you are. Yeah,
really
that's the word for it.
like,
Altruistic. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the key word. They're always trying to pretend we're just the honorable people. We just want to see everybody have a fair life and a good life, and we want to lift people up. It's this insidious do-goodery, pretending to be benevolent people, but their benevolence is always the very obvious cloak, the mask that they hide behind, that they're really trying to destroy people by stoking up animosity. And then it is real animosity then that happens then, people are told you were wronged by him. And it's incredible how easy it works and how simple the trick is, that they sort of say to one person, whisper in their ear, just like the devil, here, that guy was enslaving you and he hates you. And then, in the other ear say, see that guy, he's getting really angry with you, but he is actually getting really angry with him because he's riling him up. And so we know, and absolutely in the Civil War there, people do think simplistically like, oh, well, it was the North who were just trying to free the slaves in the South. But just like you compare to South Africa as well, like, there's a lot of people who not only don't have any education, don't want any education. That's not what they like. And I've met a lot of people that are quite happy working with their hands. Like, it was only me with my stupid European middle class sensibilities that kind of thought, oh, that's cruel there. That I remember there was this woman and she was cutting grass with basically a hatchet, right? Along a pathway. And I sort of said, like, oh, that's terrible. Like, they should give you a shears at the least, or maybe like, why don't they give you, a weed whacker or something like this, and all this sort of stuff. And as well, she didn't have the gloves. So I kind of said, oh, you have to have some gloves. Here's some gloves, And she thought I was some idiot, like giving her my gloves, because I thought, oh, this is terrible that a woman is getting her hands dirty, But like, she was an old woman anyway, and she had like plenty of crinkles in her hand, but her hands were probably stronger than mine anyway, leathery anyway, But the thing is, right, the reason why they didn't give her a weed whacker is because she liked being there every day. It was a job for her to go to, and she got paid the same money, no matter how quickly or how slowly it got done. If they gave her a weed whacker, they could do it themselves with a weed whacker. They're actually just employing people to make those people feel useful. Because it's a lot better they do something than just get paid. It's, by the way, the same thing as, like, you might find this crazy, but everywhere in South Africa, you don't pump your own gas. There's an attendant. And, you might have to tip them a little bit as well, But that's all to make sure that there aren't loads and loads of men who have nothing better to do then. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They feel they're earning an honest living.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, like, they could automate so much right now. And I try to explain that to people. I'm like, look, dude, this is one of the reasons for this equity stuff. Once they prove that you're all useless, they're going to replace you with a robot. Like, equity is going to lead to everyone being equally useless, is what it's going to come down to. And nobody seems to see it coming. I can see, you were talking about the divisions they cause. Well, I can see what they're doing here in America already. It's like we talked about with language, what creates a city, or what turns a village into a city, then into a nation, right? Well, there's going to be a few things. Religion helps, bring everyone together. But the main thing is going to be a system of writing and language, right? Well, if you have one nation and you convince two different groups that to go under a different definition set, what are you doing? You're creating two separate nations, aren't you? Eventually, what will happen is they will do what people do, and like will accumulate with like, and you'll balkanize what's the biggest and most powerful country in the world, just in case they decide not to go along with what you're doing. They won't have the power to fight back. You know, at least that's my interpretation
Oh,
of what
absolutely. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why they're doing it.
Yeah. Oh,
I think,
absolutely. You're spot on. It's a fracture, a fault line, and they are basically creating the tension, and they're shaking the two different sides of the fault line. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and and they would disguise it under words like equity and all the inclusiveness and all these other kind of things. It's just a disguise for trying to basically balkanize the United States and bring everyone under the UN and all these little organizations they have so they can be told what to do. It's every war in the modern era. This is like, this is what gets me so mad when atheists and all these the followers of the scientism god like want to debate with me. It's like, dude, like you will say Christianity's done this and Christianity's done that, and I'm like, well, first off, there's only one true church and the rest are imitators. And most of the time when you're talking about awful things the church has done, it's been done by them. Like, and secondly, on top of all that, like the modern era has been the bloodiest era ever in human history since the flood. America, since its beginning, we've been here almost 245 years, I think, or maybe it is 245 at this point. And out of 245 years ish, we've been at war for 223 of those years.
Right. Yeah. I remember hearing that kind of statistic before. Yeah. And yet, I did think as well, having been born in the 70s, thought like, well, the last war there was, apart from that skirmish in Vietnam and that other little military action in Korea, basically all wars ended in 1945, and peace has been ever since. And there was a time where I kind of thought, oh yeah, like it always ever will be, because now we live in a time where everybody's moral and sophisticated. Just incredible how naive I was about the whole thing. But you're absolutely right that they are balkanizing. They are creating as much friction with as many different interest groups, and creating all these different divisions, and using words like equity and inclusiveness and all this kind of thing, whereas it's a total inversion of the truth. To those things, you can sort of say those words mean exactly the opposite. And they're doing it deliberately so that, to refer back to what we talked about before, where as if politicians could just turn around and say, look, guys, to be honest with you, we've all been stealing from you, and we all just go to the same golf clubs, and we dine together in the same places around Washington, D.C. So, look, we've all been in it together. Sorry about that, but look, we figure you're going to understand. At least we came clean now, so that's all right. We have a nation to save. Let's just pitch in together. They can't do that. So having the whole place shaken, like Hercules pillars, shaken so that everything comes tumbling down. If you have this outside force basically creating this earthquake where everything collapses in on itself, that's a kind of like plausible deniability. It wasn't our fault. It was external forces which nobody could have seen coming.
Yes. Well, and that's what I'm trying to get people to get comfortable with, is the fact that, we're kind of at a point now where we only really have two options. And I hate dialectical either or options. I absolutely hate that. It bothers me so much. I always want to be that guy who's like, isn't there another road, right? But really the only two options I see is that, okay, either we buy into this one world government shit and we go into this willing contract to be in an open air prison, right? Or we collapse absolutely everything and start over. Either way, bunches of people are going to die. Either way, things are going to suck. But, at least the other way, like, with the latter, we get to choose it on our terms, right? And we get to run on our morality, and we don't have to, be in the surveillance state and all that. But it will mean losing to a great deal our technological ability. It will mean losing a lot of these international ties. It might even mean the losing of all the nations as they are, and things reforming into all new nations at the end of it. Because I realize now, like I've looked into it long enough, that this octopus, this spider web is so interconnected that if we truly beat them, it's going to mean destroying everything.
Yeah,
Everything that they built is going to have to be ripped apart. And this is one of the problems that conservatives have. They want to somehow hold on to the United States as it was, and there's no way to do that. We've come
yeah,
so far away from our roots, and we're so far apart on our beliefs that there's no way you're going to forge this back together. It's kind of like trying to, take two pieces of steel and weld them together, with no fire. There's no fire to stick the metal together and forge those two pieces. There just isn't. Like,
yeah. But from a principled point of view and from a practical point of view, I've made the analogy before to if you get a virus on your computer that I would rather just wipe everything on the hard drive and start from scratch so that I know it's built on a solid foundation, to mix my metaphors there. But
mhm.
also from a principled point of view, I'd sort of want to make sure that a root and branch investigation and clean of house were done. That there could be no chance that anybody would be able to scarper somewhere with ill-gotten gains or wouldn't meet justice. But again, I suppose I would have to sort of say that either way, it's going to be bad. Maybe I'm too eager to sort of jump that way. And a lot of people would sort of say, oh, listen, you have to be practical and pragmatic. You have to keep some vestiges of the state. You can't just have 100 million people out there starving, even for no other reason that would be Mad Max territory. You have to have some, sense of law and order or whatever. I understand that for me on an emotional level, and I have to start maybe, trying to find a way to balance this, but certainly on an emotional level, I just feel like that I would take the Pyrrhic victory as long as I got to see that all of these people went up in smoke and that they were lying in the ruins of whatever they tried to create themselves, and that they could not then rise or come in, pretending to be the saviors on horseback, or there would be no phoenix for them rising out of the flames. I suppose it's not really a good indication. It's not a thing that I should sort of say I should be proud of, but I'll be honest to sort of say like that it's kind of like a spiteful attitude of my character where I'd sort of say I'd actually be quite happy to sit there in the ruins of civilization as long as I could sort of say we're now all on an equitable playing field, me laddie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it has, it's, obviously I feel emotions. I'm a human being, but, for me, it's much more of a pragmatic thing. It's not, I've gotten to the point where it pains me. It absolutely pains me. It's why I've fought with so many people and argued with people online, even though I hate doing it. It's such an irritating thing, and it makes me in a worse mood and everything else. I do care about humanity, and I don't want to see people die, and I don't want to see chaos, but like at the same time, I have to be pragmatic and look reasonable. And the fact of the matter is, like, if we remove these people are they and their organizations are the mechanism by which everything works. If they're taken down, that means that the transport of food across the ocean stops. It means that, the internet stops. It means that, factories stop. It means that everything stops. You're talking about removing the leaders of basically every major organization, corporation, and removing the framework that runs those corporations, which is tied to everything else. You're talking about, like, it would even affect like the red lights in your city type thing, because of the fact that what they are going to do in order to try to stop us from pulling away is destroy our infrastructure, which you already see them doing.
Yeah, well,
All over.
and I do agree with you. Although I will say like that I was about to say, yeah, but if I had made a list, I suppose if I could just quickly had the time, but I won't do it. But I could name like 20 CEOs of well-known corporations who ran those corporations into the ground, and then instead of being prosecuted, were given bonuses and then hired as the new CEO of another corporation, because of their notoriety. So it's not just that, like, a lot of people think, like, well, if you got rid of all these clever CEOs, the companies would go bust. No, they could keep running just fine. I think a lot of people notice as well, when managers aren't in on a Saturday, everybody actually gets more work done, that kind of thing. And also, what is a very well-known phenomenon is that actually, when traffic lights are no longer in operation, if there's a power cut or whatever, people find, and has been demonstrated, that traffic actually flows a lot smoother, and much more smoothly if there's a policeman there at busy intersections waving traffic, because he can actually see what traffic needs to go where, rather than the lights that are just set to some algorithm that some clever person thinks that's perfect. So I would just sort of like to offer as a possible other scenario whereby removing a lot of these people might in fact not be as disastrous to the smooth running of things as we might think or assume.
Well, that is the other side of my argument there. While all this chaos will happen to some degree, it is our job in our little areas here, where, as much power as we can exercise, to start trying to put systems back in place to arrest the chaos, right? Like, we're the men of the society. We're like, at this point, like, my parents, like, they don't have much time left, and I don't know if yours are still around at all, but basically, like, our generation, this is, generation X, Y, and Z, this is our time. Okay, like, if anything's going to be done, it's going to have to be done now. And we have to grow up and get ready to, take our place, like, and start getting this back together.
Yeah.
It will be difficult. It will be dangerous. And like I said, the globalists, all the states that still remain loyal to them, will attack us. They will do everything they can to destroy our infrastructure, to assassinate leaders of our movements and things like that. But it starts with each and every one of us accepting this as a fact and becoming ready to put our lives on the line and do this. Like, otherwise, like, these people are going to continue on as they are, and things will continue on as they are.
Yeah, well, I do feel the burden of responsibility. Not that I can do anything, but of course, this is the problem, and this is why we're talking, I suppose, in that we do need a lot of people to be sort of the same mind, so that if it were ever possible, it's the Hydra problem that you mentioned there, that if you would, even if the USA would be able to put people in power in its own institutions, it would be attacked then by the UN, who would sort of say America's gone rogue or whatever. So that's the Hydra problem. But even if it were possible, what we have to be absolutely sure of is then a bit like sort of maybe that movie The Untouchables, in that there are men who cannot be bribed. And even though, like, let's say if I were one of those people, that I actually wouldn't like the citizens, a bit like a parent might not like his own child, but might love them and sort of say, well, they deserve to carry on, right? We can't have no more human beings, which does seem like there might be an aspect of societal collapse because of birth rate collapse, coming in the next generation or so, where there's so many people who are non-binary and what that before they figure it out, it's too late then to sort of say, well, we need to start having children, and so much abortions and all this kind of thing. It all tots up. But I'll just sort of say then, I suppose the general plan or the general idea would be, if there were a way to commandeer the institutions of society and the state, and have people there who basically felt that they had a responsibility to the wider society and civilization, much more so, well, actually in accordance with what any of these sort of public offices should have, that what you would want is people who already know what their own moral framework is, have it fully articulated in their own minds, can discuss it with each other, and that they don't just then sort of become corrupted as soon as they get a bit of power. But anyway, I suppose what I want to say, we've now talked for 2 hours, and we've kind of floated around this word of equity and whatnot. Let's get back to reading a little bit of this. We get more of an idea of the insidious language, at least, that these people use, even if we can't definitively sort of disambiguate the sort of soft legal jargon. And then I suppose what I'll say is that we will, I'll ask you then, in the third hour, to tell us your story about how you left the Freemasons and why it was painful, as a sort of contrast or comparison to how it might be that we're all and have been, we're in a process of leaving our societies, and I think we definitely started to do that back in March 2020, like for real, rather than just sort of say what's going on here. So can I read a few more paragraphs here from this page 3 of this document from the Who Are We?
Yes,
And we'll do that. Okay.
please do.
So number 4 is reiterating. So saying again, the necessity to work towards achieving strong and resilient health systems. Resilient means it's resistant to damage, that it's strong, even if there's an earthquake of terrible germs that go all around the world. It's resilient, not like the health systems we had in the terrible past in the 2020s. Oh God, no, like them when the whole health system nearly collapsed. And universal health coverage so that's they spelled it out there. That means that every single Democrat will go, yeah, finally, if our own government, the US, won't give us proper universal health coverage, then we'll force it to be done by the UN as an essential foundation for effective pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, and to adopt an equitable approach to prevention, preparedness and response activities. And by the way, this prevention, preparedness and response activities, it's like a drum or it's like a hammer nailing down this stuff. That's how that's the power of either assonance or onomatopoeia. And response, and to adopt an equitable again, well, it must be good if it's equitable approach to prevention, preparedness and response activities, including to mitigate. They love mitigate as well. In other words, to ameliorate or sort of excuse or make it less harmful, whatever risks there are, that pandemics exacerbate existing inequalities in access to services. Now, I can already imagine that even if there were clever people at this delegation, their eyelids would already be drooping. We'll just we get the end, we sign it and go out for lunch. I'll just do number 5, right? And then I'll get your reaction to this one here. I won't sort of commentate on this. I'll let you commentate on number 5 here. Recalling the International Health Regulations 2005 of the World Health Organization and their importance in preventing, protecting against, controlling and providing a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risks and which avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade.
Yes.
What say to that?
Well, see, like that's going to be one of those really nasty ones because you see, the thing is, all right, we're all biological creatures, right? And everything can be under their definition of equity and race and all these other different terms they use. When they go talking about health, pretty much everything can affect your health. Quite literally everything. And, when they talk about repealing that, the thing in 2005 they're talking about, that came in, right as the war on tea started and, the Big 9 event and all that. And that was the first foray into all this. And that's where you started seeing your doctor's offices having to put in these computers and stuff like that, where they're tying all your medical records into one system, right? Well, that's where that is where that began. And now what they're doing is basically repealing that and putting new framework in place that doesn't just tie your health together in your country, but it ties the whole world's health together to where everyone goes in. All that information that your doctors have been collecting all this time, it's going to go into a centralized database to where these people have access to it and can monitor you. And that's where a lot of these things anybody who listens to Bermas has seen come up a lot is going to be these health monitoring devices, these watches and headbands, and pretty soon it'll be your clothes themselves that have sensors in them. But either way, that's where it's going, and this is part and parcel to what would tie in to such disasters as the train crash recently and stuff. Those chemicals, that has to do with what? Your health, right? you know, it makes you sick. And they're already putting out these little watches and to everyone, these little ID tags from the fire department in that local area. They're already giving them the health monitoring stuff. So what does that tell you they're preparing for there? They're preparing, they're saying without saying it, that that disaster applies to this treaty because it affects people's health. You see what I'm saying?
Sorry, I muted there. Yeah, absolutely. It's so insidious again. I mean, it just really struck me as you were sort of saying that. But I guess I'll say this, right? The British, I mean, even back in the 70s, like, and I'm thinking of like car manufacturing plants in the 80s, in their sort of accents, they would jokingly say, like, you know, about the new elfin safety department, you know, elfin safety. You know, joking, there was like this little elf. Maybe I got the accent close enough there, but health and safety, you know, and that it was sort of like a nuisance, but a necessary nuisance, right? But this is the way they always sort of start, like, and of course the workers sort of roll their eyes, like, at the idea that, you know, these people who did some kind of course somewhere, or they're college educated, where these guys, like, you know, they know that they know how things work in the factory floor for real, but you have these people interfering really in their work, you know, but they understand that, like, okay, maybe somebody did lose a finger, so you do need health and safety, and they're just waiting for an accident, waiting for something to go wrong, and then they can come in. And I've seen this so many times, you know, not just in sort of like, you know, those kind of production environments, but like even in the office, like, you know, anybody falls ill with anything, and then they have to come with a new training program for this new thing and that, and it's all about taking control over people under the guise of, we just care about your health and your safety. And those two words, like the safety of things as well, they can claim that anything is unsafe. And I mean, I've seen ridiculous stuff, like, whereas, you know, you would think it's like a Monty Python thing, where like people had to wear hard hats and high visibility vests and steel capped toe boots and all this sort of stuff. If you just went anywhere near any kind of thing that was at least sort of technically designated as being a building site, even if the whole thing was finished, there was no builders there, everything was done, it was just the red tape hadn't been formally cut on it, so it was technically a building site. So you had to wear a hard hat, as though, like, what, like, you know, you had to wear, like, you know, steel toed boots, like, in case like a JCB would like come careering in off, you know, off the main street and run over your foot or whatever it might be, you know, this kind of nonsense. And I realized, like, what's the purpose of it? And the purpose is just to basically assert the concept or the idea that they have sort of it's a bit like jurisdiction, I think maybe is the word I was thinking of, like the FBI in those movies can come in and say to the local police cop, like, I have jurisdiction here, start barking orders, you know. And I noticed that, like, all of a sudden in the corporations, only in the last 10 years, much more so even, health and safety, and if people were in that game, they even seem to have veto control over anyone in the corporation, you know, because they could sort of say, like, well, you have to do this, you know, and what do you want? Do you want to get sued? Or, I mean, are you going to tell me that that's safe there, that they don't have to wear that? And you'd see the people kind of going white, kind of going, oh, I don't want to tell the person they don't have to wear this, because what if somebody has an accident and I'm personally responsible, you know, this kind of way. Just incredible how they get in with this health and safety stuff.
Yes, and I mean, it's just like with companies. Once you sign over and you become a publicly traded company, you now have a board of directors. That board of directors has, you know, they want to make money, so that's their motivation to stay in the game. And then, you know, and so on and so forth. You can go through each of these people, and they all have like money as well as other things that keep them playing the game, right? And you're absolutely right. That is what they're doing. It's to get the health and safety thing in, you know, get the tentacles in as many places as absolutely possible and tie it into this system. It's about giving, you know, tying everyone into the digital, like, surveillance grid, one little network at a time. And, you know, and so too, getting the employees used to this, like, constant, you know, non-governmental organization interference. You know, you can use the example of, like, you know, construction crews. If they find even like one little arrowhead, they have to stop everything, and, you know, and then, like, have to call in people. Or if you find something on your property Like, and you tell anyone about it, like the government's going to be there, section it off and tell you can't go on your own property because now it's been annexed by the state, right? So it's all the part of the same process of going in there and, you know, getting your stuff. And it all goes back to that mob tendency of how, you know, back when I was still a Mason, you know, part of the way it would work is, you know, one of the good old boys within the order would want, you know, this piece of property that somebody didn't want to sell. You know, they would want access to this neighborhood that people weren't wanting to sell their property in. Well, what happens? Well, you know, you work with the cops and you work with the DA and you work with everybody to make sure that crime kind of gets into that area and brings down, you know, and once crime goes in, once police cars go cruising the streets all the time, that brings the property value down. Now you can go in and buy it up for cheap because people want out, right? It's all these same kind of little insidious games. It's the problem, reaction, solution. I know that's so, you know, played out now, but it can't be said enough, really, because that's the most simplified way you can put it. They cause a problem so that you will react and then beg for them to come in and save you, which then gives them the access and the control that they need. It's
Well,
all
certainly, yeah. Well, certainly, and you mentioned it there. You know, the problem, reaction, solution, that they caused the problems, and the very problem that they caused in the past was nobody noticed any effect of, and you know, I'm going to be very careful here. Nobody noticed any effect of people's health necessarily being bad. But what they certainly noticed was the restrictions on trade. And here they are, sort of saying, well, we have to have an agreement now, a memorandum of understanding, and you know, we must recognise and re-articulate and reiterate, you know, that you know, there have to be ways to be found to still allow free trade and transport. They were the very ones who prevented it, who stymied it at every turn. And we said they were going to do this, and it was so obvious back then, and it's so obvious now. But yet still people will refuse to see. It's so infuriating, but I just wanted to put a fine point on that. And we'll get on to reading a few more articles or clauses, maybe is more accurate. We're only still on the page 3 of this draft memorandum of the basically the WHO. What they're trying to do is, and why I have the thumbnail, we just want to harmonize with you. What they mean, it's a euphemism to sort of say we would just want to harmonize our laws with you, is we just want to supersede, countermand our rule over you. Our law is going to supersede your regional, national or governmental law. Our universal international law is going to supersede it. That's what they mean by harmonize. But seeing as you mentioned it there again about, you know, the sort of underhanded tactics of the Freemasons, I do think it's time to sort of deliberately go off topic now, but give you the opportunity now and take as long as you'd like. We're in the 3rd hour, but we'll keep it maybe close to 3 hours, but give you some opportunity there just to take it now to unfold. I'd really like to know myself the circumstances surrounding maybe the decision where you sort of said, today is the day I'm going to do it, what it was that was the final straw, and any other way you want to sort of explain how and why you left the Freemasons, JC.
Sure. Well, you know, as I'd said, like, you know, in those original streams, I believe, you know, I had kind of grown up around this kind of stuff my whole life. Like, you know, in the South, the Baptist church in a lot of ways is Freemasonic. And, you know, I went to Freemasonic private school, you know, where, you know, I was just immersed in this stuff my whole life. And, you know, had these ideas of being a knight and like, you know, the kind of dreams a kid gets in his head, you know, you want to be a hero, all that kind of stuff. Well, it never turns out quite to be what you're sold in the first place. And they get you in there slowly but surely, as we've talked about before. It'll be just this little time that you need to compromise your morals for this favor for this person because they did a favor for you. And before you know it, you get in really deep, you know. And after a few years, like I had started to become a little jaded with it. And, you know, I had started getting myself in trouble and had been busted down. See, you know, inside Masonry, there is a right-hand path and a left-hand path. Right-hand path are people who are on Front Street, right? That's going to be your sheriffs, your police officers, your CEOs, anybody who is going to be interacting with the public directly, right? And, that used to be the branch that I was in. But what ended up happening was I got myself in trouble and I got basically demoted to the other branch and ended up dealing with, the drug importation and things like that. And, the more I dealt with it, and especially in that shady world, the more guilt I felt, and it built up. And, one day I was told to do something I didn't want to do, and I refused. And, it's kind of one of those things where I got the ultimatum. Are you sure you want to do that? Kind of thing. It's like, we're your friends, man. We don't want to see you go down this route. And that's basically how most of my so-called friends played it, was, this, man, we're your friends. We don't want to, and that's how any group is going to be. It's like that at corporations that you work at. If you try to go against the grain, the other employees will be the ones who police you back into orthodoxy, right? They're the ones who's going to try to get you back on path. And that's really, I realize now, that's all my friends were doing, my so-called friends anyway. They were doing their job and trying to guide me back on path and keep me from going off reservation, as they call it. Well, at the end of the day, it ended up getting to a point where I worried them enough to where they figured they needed to get rid of me, and they most certainly did everything they could to do that. They, it was a matter of it, they'll try to delete you, they'll debank you. And because this goes back to where the tentacles of the octopus, that parasite type thing. Well, see, like I said, I already grew up in it. So all my family are military, police, and Masons, right? For the most part, they don't raise horses or do something like that as well. And, that part enough is to keep someone in, or is enough to keep someone in. But then you have the fact that usually your wife is going to be an Eastern Star witch, and your boss is going to be a member of the club, and so is the guy who works on your car, and so is your lawyer, and so is the judge, and so is everyone else. And okay, you look at your life at this point, and everything in your life ties back to the order. The guy who runs the local bank branch, he's also a member of the order. So if you piss them off, you've basically made yourself persona non grata to the entire town. Anybody who's got any power anyway. So you'll quickly find yourself not able to get a job. You'll quickly find yourself getting divorced. You'll quickly find yourself not being allowed to see your child, or, being disowned by your family, and, all these kind of things. And, it's one of those things, as above, so below, as within, so without. On the micro is the same as the macro. So the same methodology they would use to keep me or anybody else inside the order is the exact same game that they're playing on an international level. What people don't understand is, all through these years with pop culture and social media and all these different tools that they have slowly been initiating society into the mystery religion and preparing them for this alchemical change that they're about to go through. And, just like all the other alchemical changes that took place before through the other 3 industrial revolutions, they're slowly bringing mankind towards this Luciferian aeon. And it's all by using the exact same methodology that they would use on the small level with just a single person that's within the order, all the way up to nation states. It's all the same. If you try to leave the club, they will debank you. They will you'll soon find yourself with 0 friends. Your friends will even become assassins, as I found out on 3 different occasions. And, they will start taking out your friend. Any friend who tries to help you, they will take out, as I also had to find out on a couple of occasions. So, it's the exact same thing. If, your country tries to break loose, then they will go taking out anyone who tries to help you. They will cut off all supply lines. They will cut off any kind of funding or banking institutions you had access to, etc. Like this is, and and I would equate like the divorce and loss of your personal family. That's going to be this on the same level as like this. There's going to be portions of society that want to go along with it, and then there's going to be all of you who don't. So it's really that divorcing of yourself, your nation, your city, your town, whatever it may be, divorcing it from this system is going to cause the same thing, whether it's on the micro or the macro. It's going to cause the same consequences because the game that is being played is the same. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I was picking up on a lot of things there, and when you were sort of saying again, you've said it before, but it's good to think about it again about how they're gradually, initiating people into the mysteries. It's parallel with two things. Totally parallel with that they gradually sort of raised our societies up to this sort of service level. Well, they did refer to it as service level economies. And I mean, any old fool could have sort of said, you can't just keep having a society where everyone's just selling services to each other. Like there has to be some tangible goods, I mean, could you imagine like cavemen sitting around, sort of saying, well, I can sell you like a retirement portfolio or a retirement plan based on a portfolio of a sort of a tranche of different retirement funds. You'd be kind of going, well, that's all like sort of lovely nonsense in my head, but it means nothing as far as like, fuel and fire and something to eat.
Yeah.
And then the other thing then, you're saying initiating people, it's not just getting society, so comfortable like that, but also quite literally, like, I mean, I'm still coming to terms with this. I still don't quite know what it is. It's a very difficult step outside of myself to understand this, but it seems to me that one of the misapprehensions that I was laboring under was that everybody was born with more or less an understanding of what it meant to be moral. But it seems to me from just afar and looking at sort of a lot of Generation Z and the stuff that you see from TikTok, it's hard to tell how much of it is just pushed or how much of it really is a representation of a large proportion of them. But there seems to be so many people who have a kind of moral stupidity or that low intelligence, even though you could have somebody born with Down syndrome who's very kind and gentle. So it's not exactly a correlated thing, but there seems to be these kind of people who have such a low level of intellect that they don't think about morality any more than they think about a math problem or geography or anything else. And so it's never occurred to them to wonder about not just philosophy, but basic morality, like that, that if I do this to you, then I could expect you to do the same in return to me, this sort of stuff. It's like, that kind of the shocking immorality that you see on display in Idiocracy, where it just doesn't occur to people to think about anything higher minded, which includes a morality. So that's how slowly, bit by bit, as you say, I interpret what you mean there, like, to be that the Freemasons have inducted people into this sort of terrible demonic kind of, I mean, basically I can see people sacrificing children to Baal, putting them in brazen bulls and setting a fire underneath them, or if they were Incas, throwing their children into volcanoes. I seem to remember hearing somebody say recently, and I'll just say this, that the reason why in those, and what can I say to be kind of distinct about it? I'll say this, right? So that you said that the 10 tribes went north, right? And I always thought it was 12 tribes, and apparently it is because there was 2 tribes that were in the south and 10 in the north. And that maybe let's just say that the 2 tribes were considered or are considered to have a hierarchy, whether people think that's them giving themselves their own good press or not. Well, what I've heard it suggested was that a form of eugenics might have been this Baal worship where they threw their children. And I was sort of asked the question, why would a mother throw her own children? What if it was a form of a kind of after-birth control, whereby they sort of said, this child is cognitively impaired or defective in some way physically, so that one I don't mind sacrificing. And if you do that enough over a few generations, maybe there will be an effect on the sort of bell curvian mean IQ. I actually felt very stupid for not having realized that. So there may be something to that. And while it's horrific that Incas or whoever might be, if the story is true, that these people were sort of less civilized than we are now, like that's what we like to think, and we're throwing, children into volcanoes and whatever. Well, the the aspect that I also hadn't considered until quite recently, and I'll say this, right? It's a bit of a tangent, but I'll say this anyway, because I think it's all relevant to being inducted into the mysteries, which I think lowers people's individual light as far as morality goes. I remember people being shocked, and I was too, at the sort of description of how Aboriginal women would be just like you would see in documentaries about polar bears or whatever, that a mother would know leading into the harsh winter that she only had enough room or enough food in the forest or whatever it might be to not in the forest, but anyway, that there would only be enough food to look after the healthiest cub, so that she would deliberately leave the other cub. If the other cub couldn't make it, well, then he'd be left there bleating. And everyone of course thinks it's so cruel, and the human beings want to intervene. And I remember hearing about Aboriginal women basically making the same decision. And if they had more than one child and they had to move maybe like to somewhere else where there was water, that she wouldn't be able to carry more than one child, so that she would bash the head of one of the children's off a rock or whatever, and so that she could look after one of the children. And again, we kind of thought, oh, well, that would never happen in our Western civilizations. Of course, we understand what happens in these nice, clean clinics. And if you want to have a look at my community tab, you'll see some reviews, Google reviews of these clinics that solve problems for young couples and women. Anyway, I'll wrap this up here now and sort of state that when you realize that what goes on under the cover of both euphemisms and health provider clinic facades and all this sort of stuff, you actually start to think, or I'll speak for myself, I actually started to think, at least you have more honesty. It's out in the open, at least, even if that is true, about an Aboriginal woman bashing the head of one of her children. There's more honesty, at least, in that, which is, I think, fundamental to why I think predisposed or already predisposed to be the natural enemy of these people who operate under the covers or cloaks of like the Freemasons do, that they sort of cultivate this facade of being people who do good in their community. Meanwhile, under the kind of covers of darkness, they do the most despicable evil. I think that's why I don't like them. It's because fundamentally I object to the method that they use. And I think that, the whole idea of Machiavellian, that they say the ends justify the means, I sort of say, like, you taint whatever you could achieve by not at least being upfront about your motives and your methods from the beginning. Well, it's been quite a tangent there, but I think I got it all kind of encapsulated anyway. What do you think of that, JC?
I would agree. The fact of the matter is, you can look at the Spartans, you can look at the people in Great Britain, all the way up until recently, as the as the Middle Ages, even the asylums. I don't know if you've ever heard of Bedlam Asylum in the 1800s, early 1900s Great Britain, but Bedlam was built.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
Well, the place that it was built, the reason it was called Bedlam is because that used to be a ditch in which people who had babies they couldn't take care of or that were deformed, they would take the baby and leave it in that ditch. If you had a child that had something wrong with it, they practiced a form of eugenics where they would place them in this ditch there at Bedlam and just leave them to die. It wasn't until like Christianity really kicked in and started creating orphanages, and they had baby boxes outside nunneries and stuff like that, where people who couldn't take care of their babies or babies that were bastards and didn't have a family, you know, these young women would take and leave the baby on the doorstep of the nunnery. That's where that trope in movies and stuff came from. It's a real thing. In the pagan societies, this was absolutely something that was done, and Britain kept doing it even once they became Christian for quite some time. It was just ubiquitous. You understood that, like, you could not feed like that baby, and you know, it's kind of like, do you let your whole family starve or just the one, I guess. But in Britain, they specifically had this, and in Sparta and in other places in the ancient world, they specifically had a thing where if you had any physical deformities, even like, or you know, that you would be left to the left to the gods, as they say. They'd take you out to the woods, and you know, it's kind of, you see it in the story of Romulus and Remus. You know, they were raised by a wolf, she wolf, for a reason. It was, you know, they were left there rather than being killed like they were ordered to be, right?
Yeah. And look, I certainly don't mean to be. Every time that I say something like this, I'm afraid that people might misinterpret what I'm saying as an attempt to equivocate and sort of create a false equivalence between what we would rightly consider to be sort of savage societies, whether it might be in indigenous Australia or Africa or elsewhere. Um, and sort of say, oh, well, we're really the same. Who are we to talk? No, at least we did state that there was a time, and it definitely seemed to me that, you know, at least openly people did sort of say, look, these are the values we stand for. We don't stand for that sort of thing. And that if anybody would unearth or discover that kind of thing happening, there would be, you know, a genuine outrage about it. Now, a lot of stuff was uncovered, and what I noticed certainly in this country was that, let's suppose, like, we could talk about, like, just for example, from the 1950s maybe up to the 1980s, there was that kind of thing where, like, if a girl or a woman got pregnant outside of marriage, that it would bring social shame on her and her parents, to the point where they would try and not let it be known, and just sort of send her off somewhere, and then people would kind of notice that she was gone, and then kind of go, oh, better not ask, because they might sort of put two and two together. But there was, I mean, it's not as if that was good, but the opposite then, we've talked many times about pendulum swinging. The opposite then shouldn't be that, oh, well then, you know, instead of having the Magdalene laundries and things like that, where women then had to go and live in a nunnery for a while, and the baby went up for adoption and all this sort of stuff. While that might have been heartbreaking, the opposite then isn't to sort of say, right, that's it, abortions for everybody, and you know, little American flags for everybody else, whatever it might be, you know, to the Simpsons there. It always seems to be from one extreme to the other, and just like, you know, the Hegelian dialectic, or the framing the argument of the Overton window. Well, I mean, do you want women to have to go to nunneries? And you know, by the way, I did see very recently a modern one. I don't know if it was Canada or somewhere in the United States, where there was a news report of, only in the last year or two or something like that. It was like a serving hatch, and it really seemed that way, where like somebody just went to the hole in the wall, put a baby there, closed the door. It was just, and then, you know, from the other side, then they open, oh, new baby, that's great, you know, another customer, ding ding, you know. Even though that looked heinous, at least like there was a chance that the child could survive. Now, of course, could grow up to be Charles Manson, you know, and have a grudge, like, that its mother never loved it and this sort of thing. Like, all the what ifs and the laws of unintended consequences, you just don't know. But there should be at least a general principle of, you know, no matter what the outcome is, that there is at least an attempt to cause the least harm, a genuine, you know, always trying to search for the least harm to be caused. But I didn't mean to go down too much down that very interesting to hear about, you know, that leaving the Masons and their attitude and this. But I'll have to give you the opportunity to say anything back to that you'd like. And then maybe we get on to this, the health, that they're going to sort of say, oh, we'll take care of all that antenatal health, prenatal health, or sorry,
Yeah, well,
postnatal health. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Well, it plays into all this, you see, like, you know, they have these whole little birthing chamber things where they're going to grow babies in pods, and, you know, they have genetic editing now and all these kind of things. And, you know, I just will say, like, you know, organizations like, you know, Planned Parenthood there, used to be called the Eugenics Institute until after World War II, and everybody didn't like the word eugenics anymore, so they just changed it. But that doesn't mean they're a different organization. That's what, like, the people who brought you birth control and all these anti, like, sex commercials and all these different things you've seen over the years. Yeah, those are the very same people who back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s here in the United States were, like, quite literally sterilizing people who had anxiety disorder, or, if you were perceived to have any kind of flaw whatsoever, like, you were forcefully sterilized. Like, these are the same kind of things that they're talking about bringing in here with this health equity stuff. It's kind of like one of those things. It's like, well, you wouldn't want to have a kid who might be mentally deficient and then therefore might be not equal to everyone else and able to keep up. You wouldn't want to do that, would you? Like, that kind of thing. It all ties back, like, and that's why we can go on so many tangents, because all this stuff spider webs into everything else.
Yes, and again, I mean, I'll state it outright. It's another way. It's insidious. In other words, it gradually burrows into your psyche and your morality. It always looks for a chink in your armor to sort of say, oh well, I mean, you wouldn't mind this and you wouldn't like that. I mean, of course, we agree in principle this, but I mean, what about this? Always trying to confuse people morally, and it's just like how the devil does it. It's always trying to find a little inroad into you. So it's like, oh, of course we wouldn't. Nobody's saying that we'd like killing babies. But like, I mean, of course, it might be the least cruel. It might be being cruel to be kind, or it might be a mercy, a small mercy. I mean, if the child was mental, what if it had Down syndrome, or what if it was missing some limbs? Wouldn't it be cruel to birth a child that was blind and deaf and dumb? I mean, Helen Keller, maybe, you can have one or two of them, but I mean, if everyone was, I mean, it'd be terrible. And then you kind of go, oh, well, okay, we'll have to have some abortion, small amount of abortion. And then they're away at the races, then they're off once they have, a little window into it. And of course, I will say, I mean, that's at a point where I would sort of say, okay, there's a lot of very loving and nice and very productive people even who have mental and physical abnormalities. But I do remember that we had a neighbor once whose youngest child had a kind of mental illness whereby it was like they used to talk about madmen had the strength of 10 men. And this guy, he was prone to losing his temper, and he was like, he was on a hair trigger the whole time. And as he grew older, and as his parents grew older as well, they no longer could physically restrain him, and they didn't know what to do with him. It really became a problem. And that's the kind of thing where you do sort of say, like, okay, well, if somebody did come to me when the child was in the womb, you might sort of say, well, now that you know what the future holds, wouldn't it be better if we just had a little bit of abortion,
Yeah. But then that opens up to people manipulating the system and being able to skirt people before they can ever grow up to be a problem. Kind of a recapitulation of that slaughter of the innocents, trying to do away with Christ, or trying to do away with Romulus and Remus before they could grow up and become me. Or the same story you have with Brutus. Same thing. Tried to, make sure to kill him before he could grow up to be a man. And it's really like setting up this very same system as you were saying before, talking about with Moloch and all that kind of stuff. It's setting up this very same system that used to be in the ancient world under paganism, that it really is your sacrament to society, your capitulation of, your guilt and sins. It's like, oh, well, I'm a carbon being and I'm hurting the climate and I'm hurting this and I'm hurting that. And by having another baby, I'm going to be doing all this damage. Oh no. Oh no. And it sets you up to need a scapegoat, to need some kind of ritual to alleviate yourself of that guilt, or you can't continue on. You'll end up going mad, right? So they're setting us up in these situations so they can offer a false choice, right? Like, who said, like you were saying earlier, who says it has to always be one or the other? Who says we can't just try to do the best we can for everybody and, let God decide, like, because it's not our place to decide whether or not this person should get to live or not. You know what I mean? Like, it's not our place. like we should, like in my opinion, we should always err on the side of life. Always err on the side of life.
Yeah, definitely. And look, everybody I think at this stage knows about the slippery slope, that they told us it was a fallacy and crackpot paranoia to think that anything would ever change if they just introduced a little bit of whatever it might be, you know. You know, there's a few, I won't enumerate the ones, but people kind of know what I might be, you know. I'll say Dave Rubin, you know, just have a little bit of based conservative Dave Rubin, you know, and before you know it, and it's amazing how quickly it happens, and amazing how quickly it went from uh, there being no abortion at all allowed ever to you can have it anytime you like, even after birth, really, you know, up to and including birth. And look, she would say no more if you want to have it a little bit afterwards as well. That's currently what is the way it is in many places. Just, it blows my mind that people are kind of like, yeah, well, you know, it's up to each individual to choose, you know, because people have been initiated in that way, I think, into this kind of new modern extreme selfishness, masquerading as some kind of bleeding heart, um, not a well, caring, but I can't even think of more superlative word than that. But that you know, the idea, the pretense, the false saccharine piety, that people pretend they care so much about everybody else, but really they don't give a damn. Can I just very quickly just sort of say that Crispy Johnson here, I think this is referring back to, you know, collaborative effort to rebuild society. He said, I experienced, and I didn't recognize his word, but I didn't realize there was going to be Irish there. It's not M-E-I, well, it's spelled M-E-I-T-H-A-L. I thought it was methyl or methyl, and I was kind of thinking, oh, what's that? But it's mehel, and I think it's referring to mehav, which is the Irish for June, but it's cooperative, and I think what it generally kind of might be referring to, and it's going to give me an understanding to why Mehav means June. It's everybody working in the fields together, a community together, harvesting their crops. You know, not necessarily in June, but, you know, working in the fields. So
Yes.
he's saying in rural Ireland in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s maybe, and of course it could be applied to other things. So it's just maybe an idea of the or a reminder that the idea of cooperation doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, communism. And of course, as I learned only recently, like before the Black Plague, after the Black Plague, people from different villages would then start cooperating, moving further afield to help people where people had been eliminated or, you know, died. That they would cooperate across their villages, so they had to start bringing in surnames or creating place names out of surnames, such as say, well, that's where that John is from, that's where that Brian is from, that's where that Michael is from. Anyway, just thought I'd acknowledge one of his comments there. Right, JC, we're now at 2 hours and coming up to 45 minutes. Will we get back to reading a bit more of this document? And
Absolutely.
okay, and that was very interesting, by the way. And thanks again for going into it. And I think I did ask you before, did you want to get into details about what it was that you were asked to do? And I think you didn't want to. So we'll leave it till another time, I think. We'll leave it at that for now, right? Is that, I'm correct in saying that you'd rather not go into any more detail? But maybe, you never know.
I would rather go in detail and, like, you know, on a one-to-one basis rather than on internet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, well, what I'm saying is it's not for public discussion. Okay.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to another one of these clauses here, clause 6, I think we're on, recognizing. And again, it's the continuous present with no particular person being there, you know. There's no pronouns, as much as these people love pronouns, there's no pronouns at all. Recognizing that the international spread of disease is a global threat. Hence, obviously, we need a global governing body then, you know, global governance if it's a global threat, with serious consequences for public health, human lives, and economies. So it's not just your health, Goy, it's your economy that we care about. And economies that calls for the widest possible international cooperation and the participation of all countries in an effective, well, safe is implied, in an effective, appropriate, and comprehensive. So it's not just effective, it's all encompassing, it's comprehensive, you know. And the way they use these words to sort of say, we will sort of magically incant us owning every part of you in this aspect of your imagination and also in this aspect of your imagination. And appropriate, everything's appropriate, international response. And then I'll do number 7. And if you want to comment on that, and then we'll kind of try and go through a few more maybe. And look, I know we're probably going to go beyond 3 hours, but definitely 3:30, and we'll do definitely we're finished. Okay, so we'll see how many we can cover between now and then.
We can pick
Okay.
up where we left off next weekend if we have to.
Okay, but let's see what we can get done. So number 7, and I'll hand it off to you for commentary. Recognizing that pandemics have a disproportionately heavy impact on the poor and the most vulnerable, with repercussions on health and development gains, in particular in developing countries. Oh, we love those. Thus hampering the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and universal health coverage. Ah, JC, I can hear the violins getting closer.
Yes, it's that old appeal to emotion fallacy yet again, just like we were just talking about. It's always going to be like appealing to your emotions and then shaming you if you don't go along with it. Oh, how dare you? Don't you want the poor to have access to blah, 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 blah? It's like, well, no, I don't want the poor being poisoned. No, I'd prefer that didn't happen. And I would prefer that they didn't do to the world what they did to places like India, where, they can't get, but, they can only buy the seeds from Monsanto that like won't repopulate after the next year, so you have to go and buy more seeds and all that. Like they starved people to death, like with these kind of stupid ideas they have and everything. And they're like, oh well, don't you want the poor to like, no, I would rather you not kill the poor, because that's exactly what it is going to amount to. It's what they always do. They'll go in, they'll take control of the food and the health systems, put everybody on these UBIs and stuff, just like they did with Northern India. Everybody's like had their face and their retina scans done. Everybody's went over to this digital currency, and everybody's went over to the Monsanto seeds and everything. And it quite literally starved a bunch of people to death on the level of millions, if I'm not mistaken. And, now everybody is stuck in this system and can't get out. And, I would invite folks to, to look it up and just look at how some of the folks are talking about this stuff. I'm not the biggest fan of Russell Brand, but he does have a like I forget what it's a Miss Shiva, Dr. Shiva, I think. She talks to him about what's going on in India, and it's not good, boys and girls. It's bad. And it's that same old thing that you saw with like Mao when he and his what was it, the was it the great year, the great revolution, whatever he called his little communist revolution they had there, where he had people bury seeds 3 foot in the ground, and then nothing ever sprang up and everybody starved to death. It's these same kind of stupid systems that are going to come back and bite people. Like I said, their heirloom seeds in India were what fed them for thousands of years. And then now all of a sudden those are gone, and all they have is Monsanto seeds, where if they don't have the money to buy those seeds next year, well, I guess you just don't plant crops. And then I guess you can't pay your bills. And then I guess you will just either starve to death or be homeless,
How they got away with that is beyond me. It's an outrage that wasn't shut down, as so obviously what their plan was, that they could then ransom everybody to sort of say, well, you need to keep buying our seeds every year, like to be on a recurring business model rather than just plant your crops and just, you can tend your own seeds. Just incredible and outrageous how our own parents' generation allowed that to stop, which is why I remind them, as you said before, I wanted to reiterate that before, Generation X now are the sort of the middle-aged and getting into senior years, who should be sort of inheriting the offices of institutions of control, and raising up the younger ones. You do tend to see some Gen Z people who are sort of very aware of what's going on. So look, I don't know what proportions there are of people who are morally upright and clever. I don't see a hell of a lot of it in millennials and Generation Y and Generation Z, but could be wrong. Well, to be fair, I don't see much of it in Generation X either. But if we don't fix something now, I don't think it's something that can be gotten out of, right? It's like sort of saying, let them lock the door of the jail. We'll figure something out afterwards, Anyway,
Well,
I'll go on to the next one because it's going to start getting good, or even better, I think, or it's going to be more hot words, So where are we now? There's a few recognizings. Now I think we're finished the recognizings for now, and onto a mindful. We're mindful, but not just mindful. Sort of passive disembodied pronoun tense, continuous present. Mindful that as the threat of pandemics is a reality that has catastrophic health, social, economic, and political consequences. Well, they made sure of the social, economic, and political. Like, they definitely did that part. They upheld that aspect of it for sure, especially for the vulnerable and the disadvantaged. And of course, anybody who likes to think of themselves as being unfairly put upon, they can go, oh, thank God now. It's about time the disadvantaged had something done for them. The vulnerable and the disadvantaged. Reminds me of the life of Brian, Pandemic prevention, preparedness. There they are again, the PPPs, the prepare to fail if you're not prepared. Well, we are prepared. Or pandemic prevention, preparedness. Jeez, we're all over the hot words now. And response must be systemically integrated, right? Uproot out those horrible or word integrated systemically things and integrate some systemically good things into a whole of government, right? That's that word there, or that term which they have hyphenated into whole of government and whole of society approaches to recovery, and thereby break the cycle of panic and neglect. Oh boy, what do you think of that, JC?
well, I think it's right in line with everything else that they do. It's this, you're right, this whole of government, this whole of society. It comes back to that stakeholder capitalism thing where, basically everything, what they're telling you is everything is going to be tied together. And this is going to reach into every aspect of your life and everyone else's. I mean, it would be the best way to just lay that one out, like, the cold hard facts of it. That wording tells you right there, plain as day, that they're going to be all up in your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll mention it now. The stakeholder, you got the word absolutely right. Stakeholder capitalism, or stakeholder safety, stakeholder responsibility for the health and safety of the world. What I called, or what we called, I'm not sure if I was given, I should have said RACI, but I think we did say RACI chart, and it's in project management, and it stands for responsibility, accountability, and then I think it is communicate with or consult with, maybe, and I think that's where we consult and informed. So with some people, you just have to inform, we're doing this, but just letting you know. Other people, you'd consult with them to sort of say, is this what we should do? What do you think? You could ignore their advice anyway, but you can later say, oh, we consulted with all the best minds and best practices people and leaders in their field, and be under your breath saying we totally ignored it because we didn't align with our agenda. And then you have responsible and accountable. So responsible just means it's your job to do the thing, and it's those people are unlikely to be the people who are officially accountable, like the heads of the departments. But of course, those people will never get their names on the project. They'll say, "Oh no, that guy was looking after the project. He was responsible and accountable for that," because he effed that up on the ground. So this they would always, in these documents, these RACI charts, where you kind of have this big tabulation about who was what where and all this. You'd have a preamble, and it would always include the word. And we reach out to the stakeholders, and we make sure that all stakeholders involved in the project, whether they need to be consulted with or informed, that all stakeholders are informed or consulted with, and and so the reason I told you that, and anybody else who might listen, is that people think, yes, finally, we all get a direct say, just like Switzerland. We all get a vote on every issue that might happen now as part of global governance. You can say whatever you want, and they'll basically kind of go like, yeah, there's a box with a lever. You can press that lever any which way you like. and it'll be pretty much understood by anyone, like with any more than a pea brain, is that it has absolutely no consequence on whatever they do because they've already decided anyway. And they just smile and go, oh, that's lovely. Yeah, you've been informed, you've been consulted with, and that's it. And they're never accountable.
Exactly. I mean, according to their morality and logic, no. Like, they're going by this black magic, form of Neoplatonist morality, true altruism type stuff, where, if they, even tacitly inform you, even if you're not aware of it, and you go along with it, then you consented. So it's your own dumb fault, right? We've talked about this before. And, when they say stakeholder, it's just another one of those clever words that they like to use, which really means we're going to do whatever we damn well please because we're the ones that have we're the ones who have the power, the money, and the actual stake in things. But they're going to play like everybody has a stake, right? So that they can appeal to emotion and be like, well, this is for everybody's good. Don't you want to help everybody? Don't you want to, like, you have to give up your stuff so that we can help the whole, because a million gotta overlook one to save a million, type thing. And all their language is going to come back to that, to where basically it's going to give them the power to be able to manipulate the narrative and do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it, right?
Well, that's exactly it. People are allowed to mistakenly assume that if something is affecting them or going to affect them, that makes them a stakeholder because they have a stake in the outcome. And then they think, oh, good, well, all stakeholders, they keep saying stakeholders, get to decide and be part of the decision-making process. It's all just a yarn that they're spinning people. It is just, as we would say, sort of plumosing or sweet talking people. It's all words that signify mean nothing. And they've gotten people to a state where they are idiotic enough to believe their saccharine smiles when they say, stakeholder, you're all stakeholders.
Well, I mean, think about it though. Like, in order to be a stakeholder, you have to what? Well, you have to be putting something in that gives you a stake, right? Well, as Klaus, our best friend there, Klaus Schwab, put it, there's only going to be so many robot polishers, homie. Like, so, if you're not giving anything to the system, then that would mean that you're not a stakeholder. You're only a stakeholder if your work or expertise or whatever, your money is going into the system, right, and furthering it. So if you're the dregs of society, then technically you don't matter, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what stakeholder implies.
Yeah, the way it really works is a stakeholder is somebody who has a financial stake in the corporation and large enough to be able to dictate what happens. That's what a stakeholder is. But they allow people to accidentally form the wrong impression that they have some kind of say in what's happening, And to reiterate, and as you said there as well, like, if we don't object, then they'll take that as a nod of approval. So let me get on to number 9 here, and I'm going to skip something that's in brackets. So if people can read it on screen, good. If you can't, you just have to guess what they said there. And actually, I'm going to have to skip I'm just not going to say the word, right? We've said a lot of other words. I'm not going to say this word, but you can guess what it is that I'm skipping.
Mm-hmm.
Reflecting on the lessons learned from the thing that happened and started happening in March 2020, I'll say, and other recent breaking outs, including those of, do I want to say it? Ebola, Zika, Middle East, respiratory syndrome, and monkeypox. So I suppose it's useful that I say those things, even though I'd rather not, because this, at least, if it's going to be a record, that someday somebody might find this, that, I should have said the date earlier. The date is the 4th of March, 2023. So that the date of this document was the 13th of July, 2022. So that'll place it in time. And when they were talking about monkeypox, and when they're writing it in their documents, just sort of say, never again, never again. We can't forget about the pile of shoes from the monkeypox, with global and regional impact, and with a view to addressing and closing gaps and improving future response, he said ominously. Dun, dun, dun.
And, uh,
What do you think, Jay-Z?
Like, well, that's just showing you like what the mechanisms at which they're going to use. I mean, anything that can be perceived as stretching across borders is going to give them the ability to do the same thing. So wherever one of these viruses, quote unquote, go, they go, right? So, you know, if they perceive that, and you've heard like Bermas talk about the monitoring of sewer systems and like all these different monitoring systems that they're coming up with, it's like, well, what do you think happens when something like this alerts the system that in your suburb somebody is sick? It's like, what do you think happens then, Chief? It's like you're gonna have people in white suits showing up at your front door. That's what's gonna happen. You know what I mean? It's very much
Just like
like
an
this
ET.
in
Just like
Ohio,
an
where
ET. I'm just thinking there, But like in an IO course, but I'm thinking of an ET as well. It just occurred to me how they really telegraphed that from, the mid 80s or early 80s.
yeah, it used to be the people coming to take you to the crazy house for the 5150, which they're going to do that too. The pretty soon people like me and you, just because of the by merit of what we've said online, is enough for them to go, okay, you're crazy. Take all this stuff and
Absolutely. I
you
mean,
know,
do
like
you remember? Yeah. Do you remember the thing with Dershowitz where he explained to people that, oh yeah, you don't have a right not to have it, and if you don't want to have it, that ergo proves you're crazy.
yes, exactly that, and that's what the 5150 laws are for, and they will use those. Those are tied together with all this, I assure you. And that's one of those things that will be how they remove quote unquote obstacles out of their way.
Yes.
You can grant that, and like I said, with this Ohio thing, you have that spill. Well, it spilled over into a waterway, which then touches other waterways, which means that it gives them the ability to cross state lines, county lines onto your property, even if that water from that even touches it, right?
Yeah.
So that's just a small, well, not really even small. That's a huge disaster and a tragedy. That is a good example of what this is going to do. Like, I've been watching that very closely because it's going to affect people that I know, and it's something that everyone should be watching, because this is going to show you how a lot of this is going to operate, how they're going to come in and try to snatch land out from under people, and all that kind of stuff, try to move them into smart cities in order to get out. That's one of the best ways to do it. It's like, this is just me hypothesizing, but imagine like what would happen, like I said, if you're sitting there in your neighborhood one day, and then all of a sudden one of your dummy neighbors who's on one of these cell phone monitoring programs they've got going on, or walking around with one of these wristbands, sets it off. Well, now your whole neighborhood is quarantined. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
now none of you can go anywhere. And now who's to say it's not something that could like actually infect the land for, if it's something that stays there, like a chemical,
Yeah.
like they could say, well, you can't live here, you got to go live. Well, but don't worry, we're going to give you a new place to live. Here's you a brand new Tesla tiny home, complete with everything smart and fully surveillance equipped.
Yeah.
You
So I
know
mean,
what
it's so obvious that all of this is very clearly setting it up where they can either deliberately actually poison places, or pretend that it has, or kind of go, oh, we've detected somebody has something in their stool. That's it. Everybody now, we have jurisdiction. We have a superior right over everything. Borders, jurisdictions, doesn't matter, because health and safety trumps everything, overrules everything. And so as again, the principle has been elucidated, or stated anyway, by many people recently, but it's worth stating very, very often, so that we don't forget about this, that if you give people the hypothetical power, or if you give people sort of the power that in theory, or if it were to happen, if some disaster of a specific kind were to happen, then that gives you these extraordinary powers. Then they are obviously, going to create those disaster scenarios in order to gain those powers. It's just so obvious. So, and by the way, I suppose I'm reminded now of World War One, where they, tied everybody up in all these treaties where everybody had to mutually defend everybody. Sort of say, now, if it would happen, where this would happen, then you have to come to the defense of this, and you have to ally with that country. And then they're just going to go, right, we set up all the dominoes. So obviously they set up all the dominoes not for no reason.
Absolutely not for no reason. Like it's for every reason that like they absolutely like it. I mean, you can look back at like Hurricane Katrina that happened here in the States. Well, what happened there? Well, it wasn't shortly after all that the Katrina hit that they had FEMA down there and the police going door to door and confiscating everyone's weapons, whether they liked it or not. And did people get their weapons back? No, they did not. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Again, we just have to take your guns from you.
Happening already. It's just now this, like you were saying, is going to basically make it more official. And we're just slowly sinking into the quicksand, and nobody's really like on the mainstream is picking up on this.
And again, just to sort of say, it's shocking, but it's obvious, but it's incredible how these people move so slowly, throughout the generations, softly, catchy monkey, but it's so effective because you can never call them out and say, that's it, now you've gone too far.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard to call them out when you can't get everybody into agreement, like the problem being is, most of that's where like this mob rule thing comes in, is because as long as they amplify the dummies and give the dummies all the say, then the rest of us are kind of like taken out of the mix entirely. Everybody thinks that this voting system works and that like everything works like they've been taught in school, and basically it, and they're the ones that are going to go first. They're the ones that are going to go first, obviously.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and of course, the way it always goes is then it's always too late, and they only, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, understand when they have the jackboot in their back, or they feel the jackboot in the back as they're being kicked into the gulag. The other thing then I suppose I wanted to say is that well, it reminds me that this intergenerational plan that is unfolded so slowly. What you have then is all these people, like you prove it to them, you show them what's happening, and then they insist on a motive, like, why would anybody want to do this, as if like, again, still trying to claim that you're mad.
Which if people were honest with themselves, like it wouldn't be so hard for them to do. And that's one of the ways, it goes back to this philosophy thing. If you are really, truly, and this is where I would agree with Carl Jung to some degree, at least my interpretation of this incorporating the shadow idea, you need to know your own heart. You need to know how evil you can be. Because if you're truly honest with yourself about how evil you could be, then you don't have as much trouble seeing it in these world leaders who have power.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's very well put, very well said there, because or good contribution to the whole thing of understanding what's going on here, because so many people then, why they virtue signal is because they know in their heart of hearts, but that's their way of self-deluding to make themselves think that they're good, so they don't have to try and deal with this terrible thing that lives within them, and they don't want to admit it. They think everybody else is good, and they know they're not, and so they have to find a way of put on a pretense, and they have to find a way of lying to themselves in order to lie to everybody else effectively.
And we're all fallen creatures, and that's goes right back to that teaching that I hold so dear, like that the fact that it begins the fall, like understanding that we were this and now we're here through our own doing, and if we don't contend with this, we're going to keep making the same mistakes. Like that fundamental through line, I think, is so important for us to teach future generations so that we don't keep making this mistake, because that's
Yeah.
really at the root of it. That's really
Yeah.
at the root of it.
Well, I mean, that sounds to me like putting an end to it finally. If that's possible, I definitely would like to sort of say we put a full stop now at the end of this. And like if you were to sort of hand off a fully functioning society, I used to think I learned before that some African societies, there are some townships that live in countryside in Africa, and I remember hearing about one is that basically the way they keep order is if anybody steps out of line, they deal with it brutally, and like with capital punishment. And I thought, it's terrible. Then those people having to live in this kind of savagery, whereas that you'd never get that in our enlightened Western sophisticated civilization. But I realized that no, that's what we were lacking, and in fact, with most people, that's the only thing that they understand. Whereby, if any of these people start getting ideas and insidious type of plans, and just you deal with it swiftly and publicly, so that I thought as well about people in the past tar and feathering. Oh, that was back in the sort of 1800s when our great grandparents were very very cruel and stupid. But now I understand, like that was basically like a last warning to people, before more draconian measures would be taken.
Yes. I mean, it was actually, tarring and feathering somebody was actually, would have been a mercy in some ways as to what could happen to you, and, I've been knocked for people by saying it, but the fact of the matter is, I feel like there needs to be some kind of threat of that kind. It's just like when people were protesting outside of politicians' houses, and that, everybody was like, on the right was like, oh, the left shouldn't be there at their house. I'm like, no, that's exactly where they should be. If they're not doing their job, they're a public figure who are in charge of millions of lives. Those millions of lives have every right to go and take their grievances directly to that fucker. Like, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. As long as what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You see, they always sort of say, "Oh, it's a heinous act of public disobedience or whatever," or stochastic terrorism. That I'm sort of saying that, all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, if the shoe's on the other foot,
Yeah, and that's the thing that infuriates me, and the thing that I've been talking about since the beginning is watching for that pendulum swing, because it always happens. I've watched it happen over and over for decades now, and it will happen. You got Trump talking about building these new little cities and things like that. He shows you he's right there in on the game, and it will swing back the other way, and you watch. Like, the right will be willing to do unspeakable things to the left because the left has pissed them off for 3 years.
Yeah. And look, they absolutely will deserve it, of course, but it's all according to plan. That's absolutely what they want. Look, can I sort of say, right? We have about 17 minutes left. What I'm going to say is that we're going to, end it at 3 hours 30. So let's see if we can get at least 12 of them done, right? So number 10 now, right? Of this document where, where they, I might as well say it now, this International Action Committee that was created by the WHO to get all nations to sign up to harmonize the laws, which effectively means that the WHO will be de facto or and de jure in control of, in charge of superseding all the nations' laws. And I'm going to read some more of their insipid, insidious language here. Again, no pronoun, continuous present, acknowledging that there are significant differences in countries' capacities to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from pandemics. Sounds like a case for Mr. Equity. I was going to say equality. Sounds like a case for our latest superhero, Mr. Equity, to fix that.
Right. That's exactly it. And it only gets worse as you go on.
Yeah, all these benevolent statements are just basically drilling holes into the side of the hull of a ship, more or less, so that water can start leaking in. That's what they're at here, if the nation was a seagoing vessel.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important to put this in perspective of exactly what this is. This is an agreement like every country that signs on to this is agreeing that it agrees with to take up these causes, right? So it's a like when it has no pronoun there and just keeps in that present, like where it's acknowledging, it's like, okay, this is your country's leaders saying, yes, we acknowledge that there are significant differences in countries' capacities to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from pandemics, right? So, you know, this is, you can look at as each nation as if it was a person. You can think of it like the U.S. is standing there as Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam's reading this over and being like, okay, I acknowledge that there. You right? So, yeah, exactly that. Like they're acknowledging to, you know, to do all these things, which if you acknowledge this stuff, basically you're saying, well, if I don't do this, there are going to be consequences. And, you know, that's when things get really nasty, is when you start looking into the consequences of what happens when you don't play along.
It's so vague that there's so much room for anybody in any country, anywhere, to do anything to their own country or justify getting involved in doing anything in any other country, to make all countries equal. Oh my God. I mean, that alone, that one clause is terrifying. And everybody, you can imagine all the goody two shoes clasping their hands and smiling, clapping and blushing with the thoughts of how benevolent they are across the world, you know? Right, I'll do
Yeah.
number
Well, I mean,
11 here. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. Well, if you look at like when it comes to, that's why they chose health. Like, because when it comes to health, everything affects health. Everything. Talking about from the amount of sleep you get every day, to the food you eat, to the water you drink, to how much you walk, how much you don't, how much, you know, like the things you think, like the air you breathe, like the trees that you have in your yard. You know, oh, you can't have that tree, it might cause somebody an allergy. I mean, you see how like crazy and insane, like, and intricate in like into the control of your life it could
Yeah.
get.
Oh, absolutely. There isn't a single aspect of life. Yeah, not a single aspect of life that couldn't come under the auspices of health and safety.
Yes, and this is how like it works into that taking of land and all those other kind of things, because even though it doesn't talk about that kind of stuff, I can see where like automatically like a chemical spill or anything like that is going to fall under that, because it affects people's health. It affects
Yeah.
the health of the land and the health of the people in general. And that means that's going, which could then, because we're a global supply chain, you know, say there's products that come from Ohio that go to another country. Well, that chemical could be on that product. Uh-oh, that's an international you see, like it just,
For sure. Oh yeah.
it
I would say
thing. Every,
any of the clauses so far could be interpreted in any way that they would like, and it'll be up to them to interpret it, so they will. But
yeah,
I'm sure as we go on through this document, as they layer more and more of this stuff on top of it, even if it doesn't outright say it, and I think it will, though, in a sort of a cumulative effect, it'll all have just such. It's like piling, card on top of card on top of card on a hand. You kind of go, oh look, I'll give it to you. You can have that hand. That's the attitude will be, at the very least, anyway.
pretty much, pretty much. But yeah, I think
Right.
it gets even worse when you get into 11 and 12 here, like you know, where
Well,
it
let's do
talks.
11 and 12, so, and then we'll call it quits then at 11 and 12, all right? And we'll revisit this then at some point. Right, 11 is not just one word. They've branched out into just a general feeling of deeply concerned by the gross inequities, not inequalities, inequities that prevailed in timely access to medical and other, you know what, pandemic response products, notably injectables, oxygen supplies, personal protective equipment, diagnostics, and therapeutics. Deeply
Mhm.
concerned. So, like, there was an injustice done that people weren't able to get those things. They were crying out for them. They weren't able to get any or all of those things.
Yeah.
JC, yeah.
Knowing what we know is really what it really is saying, that we're deeply concerned that we weren't able to poison more people. Like, that's really what that comes down to. It's like we weren't able to poison and or suppress the breathing of enough
Well, let's just
people.
say we weren't able to force our product onto people. I'd say,
Yeah. Well, you would be nicer than I am.
Well, it's just, I mean, come on. I mean, maybe, look, the thing is, it could be like to the robot, there could be no sense of linear time as far as this. I guess I'm just trying to not get myself mega banned, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, true. True that. I didn't think those would trip it too much, but like, yeah, like I feel you.
Anyway, we are where we are, right? Okay, we'll do
Yeah.
number 12 now, right? Concerned by the lack of global solidarity. Oh, of course, that's a great one. They're taking that from Solidarnosc,
Mm.
in Poland, and the fall of communism because of people standing up, truth to power, and also the Teamsters in America. Yeah, the sort of knights, the iron in their iron horses on the road. Who doesn't like the Teamsters? We're on their side. Global solidarity against the big guns. Excuse me. Um,
And
yeah, go ahead.
it
Yeah.
very much it takes you into even things like war because like who's to say like this lack of global solidarity. Well, what they mean there is it was a lack of all of us to play along, right? And a lack of other countries to play along at all. And it's a serious negative impact on countries with limited capabilities and resources. Okay, there's that appeal to emotion again, and it's like, oh well, because of these countries not playing along, they made it worse for these poor innocent people over here. So isn't that so horrible? Now what should we do about them?
Yeah. And I bet you as well, they'll get, people who are, they call them low information voters thinking, oh, yeah, I remember those Canadian truckers. Right. Okay. So if I vote for this, that'll help those guys as well.
Yeah, probably. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it like I have talked to enough people on the street, like I told you for the past years, like, I've been on my little crusade, like, trying to act like Batman or something, I guess, like running around and trying to fight this and investigate things and figure things out. And the more I've talked to people, the more I found out that the average person has no clue what the hell is going on. Not a shred. And the people that you're hearing from the most are going to be the younger generation who are on social media and are also college educated. Those are the ones you're hearing from the most. And the rest of America, the rest of the world really are kind of like caught up in their own thing. And it's to them that I'm hoping to get a hold of, to get a hold of people that just might be hearing this in passing, and try to wake them up to what is going on. Because I believe that if more Americans, if more people in the world generally understood what was going on, we would have a better chance.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know. And it's very difficult to be able to even have any idea of thinking about how you might be able to tell whether what we're seeing on social media is representative or just being pushed and highlighted in order to create a narrative. But it does seem as if there are a huge amount of colleges, not just in the United States, but all over the Western world, where there are a great many people who have been told that they, in the past, have been traditionally marginalized, but now they've been affirmatively actioned into college. And indeed, just as many of them, there are also of European and people who are American and European in the colleges with them, desperately trying to win their favor by pretending that they are allies, or maybe convincing themselves that they are, and sort of saying, we need to dismantle our own heritage, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those people, there seems to be a lot of them who do seem to be brainwashed into thinking that, you and I and the people that came before them, like, we're the enemy, not the people who are the captains of industry and international ports and trade, and that it's their time, and that we are part of previous generations who've had our time, and if we've messed up, we once were able, we were given the opportunity, and we didn't take it, and we did all the wrong things because we were selfish. They're the first ever virtuous and selfless generation. Oh my God. And they're going to do some very horrible things, full sure that they have whatever it is they consider to be their God, even if they don't believe in God, but they believe in global governance, and they believe in the the sanctity of these international organizations, who need to be given the chance to fix all the terrible things, so they don't have to throw soup at paintings anymore to try and get our attention.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of these things where they have tricked them, and I got to see it firsthand, even way back when I was in school. Me being half Native American, but looking very Anglo, like the blue eyes and everything. People don't usually know that I'm mixed race or anything like it. But once they find out, they immediately started in with the trying to, it's basically, and with somebody who's mixed race, it's basically trying to make you hate part of yourself, right?
Yeah,
Hate
and
part of your
that
own
definitely seems to work. I have
Yeah,
absolutely noticed there seems to be a recurring pattern, that if there is anybody of European heritage who is mixed then with anybody else, that what they tend to do, supposing if somebody's half Afro-Caribbean, and I remember there was a case of a London or British politician's daughter, who I think was murdered she was hanging around with some people in the Caribbean who was half Afro-Caribbean and half European, but that they were trying so desperately to prove that they were more Afro-Caribbean than the real ones, that they hated Whitey so much that they would dispatch with these girls who were hanging around in a bad crowd, because they were trying to prove that I suppose that they could fit in, that they should be accepted by who they thought was the more marginalized group. So I mean, they absolutely should be blamed for what they did, but you can see how these manipulative tricks really, really work, and how devious the whole thing is.
yeah. I mean, it was harder for it worked on me a little bit when I was younger, but I eventually kind of started to figure things out and work my way out of it. But a lot of it for me, I guess, was the fact that, well, they would try to like talk that stuff, but then when I would get in amongst the groups, I looked too white for them to really like. I'm not noticeably enough BIPOC, I guess you could say, quote unquote. I hate that stupid terminology, but I don't look the part enough to really satisfy. I just look like another white dude. So, and because of that, like, it let me see kind of through the facade that, like, oh no, you really only want me to be part of your group if, like, you can somehow like use my looks to, to sell whatever message you got. Right. Like, it's not like they were wanting to be my friend, like, or anything like that. Like, they were just wanting somebody else that they could, swell their numbers up with and use as a lever to be activists or whatever. And it is just right in line with what's going on today. Even back then, I had already started to see the beginnings of it,
Well, as you've said before in the past, but it's worth reiterating. You didn't really expand on it, but we'll leave it to another time. But you sort of said that they definitely use people's appearances in order to convey certain subliminal or non-spoken attitudes, or to encourage or convince people of certain things just by people's appearances. The Bible quote about the clothes doth maketh the man. It goes against, or did go against, what I always thought was that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but people do, and with that in mind, then you ought to, cover the book and whatever you'd like people to assume is inside it, and that's all generally people do, because they generally just read the headlines.
Yeah, well, we've had that conversation about books by their cover. It's like, well, maybe that works for a book, but it doesn't generally work for anything else. And I mean, it doesn't really necessarily always work for a book, because I mean, generally, if I look at a book and it's only like 20 pages thick, I can assume that's probably a pamphlet. There are things I can assume by that book's cover just by looking at it. So technically, it's not even true for that, but it's especially not true for people. People wear who they are on the outside all the time,
Well, okay,
tattoos,
well, yeah, but yes,
piercings,
but I mean,
clothes.
Right, but there is obviously such a thing as perception management and public relations and image consultants and people whose job it is to manage the outward appearance that people have, and people then just only look no further than that. Generally, the majority of people look no further than people's outwards appearances.
Well, I mean, I had an African American friend when I was growing up. Well, several of them, but this specific one, he had the same first name as me, so like we called him J Rock. And the thing is, we were having a conversation one day with one of my other, some of my other friends or our other friends, and he had made a comment how like, I, like me personally, I had my own style and way of dressing and doing things, but he had commented on how he noticed like all other white people were basically like they were pulled out of a catalog. And he's like, and I've noticed it with my people too. Like it's like everybody has an archetype, and and that's what got me and him talking about Carl Jung and some more stuff that night. But it really is true. Like the elite have given us a handful of archetypes, and they're race specific a lot of times through Hollywood and media and all other forms of pop culture. And basically what a lot of people tend to do is they select one of these archetypes for themselves or naturally gravitate towards one, and they wear the uniform that corresponds. Right?
Yeah, oh,
Like
certainly. Yeah.
the jock in high school is going to wear the Leatherman jacket, and he's going to drive the truck or the sports car.
Mm.
And the stoner metalhead is going to grow his hair out long and wear the metal T-shirt, and
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be.
Well, people are highly prone to suggestion, and people don't know themselves. And I will say, I'm only just, I think probably in many ways now only getting to understand myself. It is a product of time spent on the earth. So certainly when you're a teenager, you see screen idols and whatever, and you try to emulate and ape them. And some of that's subconscious, some of them not so much subconscious. Some of it's very deliberate that people try to emulate the people that they look up to.
Yeah, well, even
So
as
yeah.
adults, maybe especially as adults, that's why you see all these advertisements on YouTube with like Dwayne the Rock Johnson, and all, everybody knows, like with any brains that's ever worked out, for sure, if you're into martial arts and working out and stuff like I am, that they're on steroids. That they're just trying to sell you stuff. But the average Joe who's out of shape and dreaming of being in shape doesn't know any better. And they're selling them they're selling them a look, because like they will emulate that person that they're looking up to, that idol. They call them idols for a reason, because that's exactly what they are.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
giving worship to them when you dress like them and imitate the way they speak and move and all that kind of stuff. You're giving energy to them. And your energy could be better spent doing your own thing with your own style and developing your own mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I just sort of wanted to say then from the other side of it then, like that's, I think maybe you might have misunderstood me in the beginning, because you did explain to me before that the Masons do select people for how they look in order to portray certain things to people, because like it is well known that people generally tend to make up their minds, even if they might think they don't. They do make up their own minds about other people within a couple of seconds of having first looked them up and down.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's why I have tattoos and stuff in the first place. It's like I was telling you before, I belonged to one group before that was on the front street, so I had no tattoos, no piercings, and I dressed a certain way. But when I moved to the other side, like my uniform changed. Like now I have tattoos and all the things that mark me out as being on the left hand path, right? So it's directly related to all that. Like that archetype that you accept upon yourself is important. But yes, they will use the halo effect. They will choose handsome, beautiful people, whatever, the beautiful
Exactly.
people,
Yeah.
like sell you things, because the halo effect is real. Like if somebody's like has no teeth and smells and has an awful haircut, like you're not going to listen to them as much as you would somebody who has perfectly straight white teeth an awesome haircut, is 6'2" and muscular, like that person is going to seem like it's a fallacy in our head from just survival. Like you emulate those who are successful, and that they're
Yeah.
successful,
And I suppose
by
just to
all
harken
standards.
back to who we mentioned at the beginning, right? Brett Cooper there, so we'll say for the sake of argument, anyway, like she's a pretty girl, young girl. She says nothing really, but she says things that are well put, and she articulates herself very well, and she's very natural on camera, even if some of it might be scripted or whatever. But she's not saying anything that anybody doesn't know. It's the fact that it's coming out of a young, pretty face that people really love to hear. So that's a very good case in point, Anyway, I don't want to end on a tangent. So let's just finish this number 12, and then we can pick up right next time. And I hope we'll definitely do this. Maybe we'll talk about it during the week, and we'll see how we can maybe finish this off, maybe offline, and put up this part, as an upload. But number 12 there got stuck on solidarity, but there'll be more reiteration of all this, but a lack of. And here's, just the thing I think to end on this, right? A lack of effective global coordination exhibited during the you-know-what that started in March 2020, and the serious negative impact on countries with limited capacities and resources. So again, right, we have to make all things equal, and we're very concerned with this lack of global coordination. So here they come to save the day with their solution that they're proposing. And we need to be all very concerned with this. And I don't know how we stop it. Do you have any ideas, JC, like in a nutshell to wrap this up? Like, like what, if you could sort of say in a sentence or a paragraph, how can we stop this getting ratified?
Boy, I don't know if we can.
Right. Okay. Well, look, that's as good as an answer, right? I would always love if people would be as honest as to say, I don't know, right? Or even worse than that, I don't know if we can. That's as good. That's a better answer than either false hope or just making something up to have an answer. You know what I mean? But we need to be extremely concerned, and we need to be working on trying to figure out how we could stop this.
Yeah.
Because if they get this through, like we keep talking about final nails in the coffin, and maybe not be the final nail, but like I don't know how you unwind this. This would be the global government basically being invoked into existence if this gets ratified in the United States.
Oh yes, and I mean, and this goes back to what I've been talking about with the only way people are going to really wake up is once they get kicked in the face, right? They don't, it's like you said a bunch of times, like how people are. We're not going to have the forces we need until they get kicked hard enough in the face to where they have accepted that there's no other route but to fight, right? Right now, you still have them thinking that they can vote their way out or this or that and other thing until they have lost hope in all of these traditional systems and stuff. They're not going to be prepared to do what needs to be done. So it's one of those things where I'm afraid what's going to have to happen is these things will have to be ratified. They will go through, and we're going to have one hell of an uphill battle. And at the end of that battle, if we are victorious, it's going to collapse everything, and we're going to have to pick up the pieces and rebuild it literally from the ashes. And I don't see, we kind of have that as one option, and the other option is this goes through, we fail, and everybody's under a one world government. So it's like I told you, this is for all the marbles. So we can do what we can do, and until we have the forces necessary to really fight back, we had to continue fighting back on underground, sort of like I do. I offer my services where I can, when I can, to who I can, and I try to stop as much wrongdoing as I can, with the little team I have. But until we have more people willing to do so, and that really understand this problem and understand what's going to have to be done at both before, during, and after, we're not going to be able to get anywhere.
Right.
This will be an ultimate war of attrition, and it's too much to say for me. I'm too finite to really call it this early in the game, but I'm afraid, yes, we are all going to have to take on a lot of pain before people are in enough pain to, truly pick one side or the other, because that's what it's going to do. It's going to force people to either choose the system because they're weak and scared, or to choose our side. And once we know like what kind of numbers we have and what we're dealing with, then we can, have a better idea of where we stand. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, what I would say is, and I'm just going to try and limit this to about 60 seconds, and show the urgency of this. This can't be allowed to happen. They won't be kicked in the face if this does happen. In fact, they'll make sure that nothing changes on the ground or noticeably in people's lives. That'll be the worst aspect of it, so that it won't make people feel that there's any more urgency in their normal lives. Whereas they will then, just as time then ticks by, they'll be able to point back to, oh, this was done many years ago. This was done all the way back in 2023. So if you're listening to this in 2025 or 2030, your antecedents failed you. And I'm going to say what they should have done would have been not to put one more foot forward, right? They don't get a vote in this, so they should have voted with their feet. They should have said, I'm not going to help society at all in any way, and that includes going to work, going to do any job, doing anything that helps any supply lines, any production, any well-being of anybody. So instead of like just the Canadian truckers, right? What happened to them, right? Every single person in the United States, every single person in Europe, every single person in Canada, Australia, everywhere else, stop pussyfooting about now, and you don't actually do anything, right? You until everybody has to come out into the street, priest, politician, and pauper, out into the street and say, what will we do now, lads? Right? You have to get off their timeline. That's what I'm saying we have to do. And if they didn't do it, they failed you.
Well, people better do it before they get the robots built, because the trucker thing, all that ended up doing for them is convincing the trucking companies that they need to replace the drivers with robotic ones. So, we're going to have to do a lot better than some little, peaceful trucker rally. That's not going to work, folks.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that not just the truckers, every single person in every single job, right? That's what I mean by priest, politician, and pauper, right? And everyone in between. That's what I mean, right? Doesn't matter whether you're a teacher, a factory worker, policeman, whatever you are. If you want your children to have some kind of earth to live on, don't go to work anymore until this is resolved once and for all. That's what I'm saying, right? And you would go, oh, we have to feed our family. No. There's no families to feed. Right? The very concept of family is gone. And so that's what I mean now. Can't be allowed to happen. But my prediction is dire. It's not negative. It's not positive. I think it will happen, and it'll be like that poem. First they came for the Zanzas, and I said nothing because it didn't affect me, because people are selfish.
Yeah, well, all I can say on my part is just know that until I get thrown into the gulag or chucked into a 6-foot hole, there will be a little group of rebels somewhere, trying to be the thorn in their side. I promise you that.
Okay, well, I suppose I'm thinking happy thoughts about Dennis Leary and Demolition Man. Right, listen, I'll leave it at that as sort of a slightly light up note. But I want to say thanks again, JC, and to anyone listening throughout the stream live or on playback. And who knows, maybe if somebody finds this in some far distant dystopian future, I'm sorry that we failed you. Okay, thanks again anyway, JC, and hopefully we'll talk again very soon.
For sure.